Good morning, everybody. We just need a couple minutes. We're still working on a few technical things here in the office, okay? Good morning, everybody. And I get a thumbs up that everybody can hear me okay. I think we've got our issues resolved. Okay, thank you so much. I see a thumbs up, appreciate that. All right, well, we'll get started. We've got about 66, 67 folks on the line. I'll just run through some meeting instructions here real quick before we get into the agenda items. So I just want to welcome everybody this morning. I'm Mia Marvelli, the Executive Director of the California Building Standards Commission, and this is the Cal Green Carbon Reduction Collaborative Workshop. This is the third workshop. This is a joint effort by the Division of the State Architect and the Department of Housing and Community Development, NBSC. Workshop number 1 was April 4th, and workshop number 2 was May 19th. Those meetings can be viewed on the CBSC YouTube channel, and that link is actually available on the agenda for today's meeting as well. That link takes you to our global YouTube channel, and you can look through the dates of the meetings and select the one you would like to watch. There are representatives on the line from the Division of the State Architect and the Department of Housing and Community Development. I'd like to call on a few of those just to ensure that they're on the line. So I'll start with Ida Claire, the State Architect. Are you on the line? And then maybe you could pass it off to your other DSA members, and then we'll go to HCD Kyle Kraus. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mia. Ida Claire, State Architect. I'm going to pass it over to Eric Drever, please.
Eric Drever, Principal Architect, DSA.
Anyone else from DSA before I go over to HCD? Okay. Oops, Mitchell, I see you on the line. Is Kyle on the line? I'm sorry, I'm not seeing all the participants right now.
I don't think Kyle's on yet, so I'll start with introductions for HCD. Good morning, everyone. Mitchell Baker, Assistant Deputy Director for HCD's Division of Codes and Standards. And I'll introduce the team on the line today. We have Emily Withers, our State Housing Law Program Manager and Resident Expert, and Lead District Representative Tom Martin, and I believe Emily Hill is also on the line, and Kyle Kraus, our Deputy Director and CBO, will likely be on the line momentarily.
Okay, thank you for that, and thank you all for joining us. I appreciate that. So I just want to mention that, you know, while BSC is hosting this, This is a collaborative with the three departments. And so we'll be tag teaming this conversation as we go through the meeting. It just so happens that, we're using our Zoom host here in our conference room. So bear with me here. So I'm going to go through the purpose and the goal of the charter and the members, and then I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll go to item number 2 where we'll discuss the charter for a few minutes. All right, so just a reminder, the purpose of the Cal Green Carbon Reduction Collaborative is this was established by DSA, BSC, and HCD. And it consists of the representatives from the design and construction professional organizations and those others that are affected by green building standards. The object is to work with the state agencies to provide input and feedback for future rulemaking changes related to carbon reduction regulations in the Cal Green Code. This effort also supports the California's Climate Action Plan and supports the governor's administration. Objectives. Creating a green building standard code path forward is an effort that involves many state agencies, which I'll discuss in a few minutes. It also involves industry, of course, and our design professionals, organizations. And also these regulations must be enforceable. So it also involves the enforcement entities. And those participants are part of this entire group. BSC and DSA very much appreciate and HCD appreciate your participation in this effort to move forward with Cal Green changes. I'm going to go through a few meeting housekeeping items. This is a virtual Zoom meeting. To make a comment, attendees can raise the hand feature in Zoom. We'll also pause and take comments from participants on the Zoom phone line that cannot raise their hand. The Zoom chat feature is enabled so that state agencies can share a few links, but we're asking that the participants please not use the chat feature to communicate, and this will help discourage sidebar conversations. So if you have a comment, please wait and we will get to you with your raised hand, or we will go to the phone line, but please do not post your comment in the chat. We're not monitoring it for, we're not monitoring that feature. I'd like to remind everybody that this meeting can be viewed on the CBSC YouTube channel, which is linked in the meeting agenda. This meeting is also being recorded, and you can go back and watch this on our YouTube channel. Just a heads up, if you're monitoring this on the YouTube channel, there's about a 45-second delay. Closed captioning is available via the Zoom's automated live transcription feature. You can choose this by clicking the CC Live Transcript button. Closed captioning will automatically appear if you are watching via the YouTube channel. The public may provide comments on each agenda item by calling in on the Zoom teleconference line number, teleconference number provided on the meeting agenda, or by using the raise hand feature in Zoom. Instructions are provided at the end of the agenda. If you have difficulty with the technology, you can call the CBSC office at 916-263-0916. That phone number is also listed at the end of the agenda. Our goal is to take a short break around 10:30. And Eric, I'll ask, is this a good time to provide the link for the DSAbox.com where more meeting materials can be viewed? I just want to remind everybody that in order to receive the meeting invitations, please sign up on the BSC or DSA HCD contact listserv. And I'll put up a slide with that information at the end of the meeting. But there is also a portal, a DSA portal, and that portal, if you sign up to have access to that portal, you can view additional meeting materials. And this is also where any information that is sent by the participants will be loaded into that box.com. So Eric, can I hop over to you real quick?
Thank you, Mia. Yes, I'm en route right now, but I will pop it into the chat in about 20 minutes and let you know then.
No
certainly find it
problem. We
great.
can also recap this. I was going to recap this at the end of the meeting, and maybe that's a good time when I post the who to email and all that. We can do it at that time too. Not a problem.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to discussing the charter. I just want to open it up to any of the state agencies. Do you want to make a comment before I move into the charter item number 2? Okay, I don't hear anybody, so we'll just move into charter. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, so please bear with me. I have to shift my ability to view what I'm doing here. I'm sharing the screen, but I can't make this any bigger because I have to do it that way. Thought it would go full screen on me. It's in protected view. Can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, did it just get smaller though?
It did.
All right, let me try this again. I don't know why it's kind of bogging down when I try to move it around. Okay, let's try this again. All I'm trying to do is find the top part so I can make it full screen.
The top of the bar on this side and drag it down.
That's what I'm trying to do. It won't let me. So what do you see on your screen? Is it better?
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay.
That should work.
All right, everybody, sorry about that. I just want to let everybody know that we first shared this charter at the first meeting back in April. During that meeting in April, there was a lot of comments and feedback that the Department of Housing and Community Development would like to be added to the charter and become another partner within the charter. Our original focus was to focus on non-residential occupancies, but since the conversation overlaps with residential occupancies, we've now, the primary change to this entire document is the fact that we've added the Department of Housing and Community Development throughout. So this is shared on our webpage as well. We use track changes so that everyone could see the changes. I'm going to scroll through here very quickly. We had a consensus at the first meeting that everyone agreed on the rules of engagement for the meeting, and now this version simply adds the Department of Housing and Community Development. And the other additions are a few state agency additions and non-government organizations. We added a few, but I want to remind everybody that if you're not listed on this, this is a list that's including but not limited to. So just because you may not be listed on here, it doesn't mean you can't participate in the meeting or provide feedback, please. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the Department of Housing and Community Development. They would like to provide their overview on their authority and role within the CCRC.
Thank you, Mia. Really appreciate it. Nice to see everyone again. So the team here at HCD is thrilled to officially and fully participate in the Cal Green Carbon Reduction Collaborative and recognize the benefits of reducing carbon within residential occupancies. HCD intends to ensure that carbon reduction is a key component in our Cal Green regulatory development framework to support the state's goals and efforts to achieve carbon neutrality. HCD's Cal Green Authority is located within the Health and Safety Code and further clarified in Chapter 2 of the California Administrative Code in Title 24. HCD is charged with proposing for adoption Cal Green regulations for residential occupancies, like dwellings, apartments, hotels, motels, factory-built housing, et cetera, with the primary purpose of ensuring cost-effective and feasible standards are proposed to promote greener construction, which harmonizes with the decarbonization efforts of this collaborative. HCD's goal and participation in the Ccrc is clarified in the charter, which is to gather substantive feedback from Ccrc members and participants, which may include proposed code language, rationale, supporting documents, fiscal and economic information, and evaluate the feasibility of adoption either during this code cycle or future code cycles and collaborate with stakeholders. We look forward to the participation and the presentations today and have no doubt the discussions will be fruitful and carbon reducing. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mitchell. Appreciate that. Just to kind of full disclosure for everyone on the group here, the Division of the State Architect and the Department of Housing and Community Development, we're working on a number of other regulatory changes this code cycle. And we coordinate and collaborate at least weekly, if not sometimes daily. And so this effort certainly is meant to be collaborative with all the state agencies. And we look forward to hearing from the presenters today. Before I move on to agenda item 3, which is a subject matter state agency, does anyone from DSA want to chime in, or are we okay to move on to agenda item 3? I forgot one thing. I forgot to ask the group, and I'm going to unshare my screen right now. Bear with me. This is different than the software I normally use, so I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to see all the participants. I was going to ask, is there a consensus from the group on the charter before we move on? Maybe we could just do that with a hands raised, and Barbara is here with me. She can probably just look and see if there's a majority of folks that are in agreement with the charter, and we're all going to work within the boundaries of the charter. So I see a lot of hands going up.
Yeah, there's a good number going up.
Yeah, I should probably raise my hand too. Huh? Okay, perfect. All right, thank you so much. I think that pretty much covers the majority of the group. I'm going to lower my hand now. Appreciate that. Okay. All right, I'll move on to agenda item number 3, which is a subject matter expert state agency. Actually, before I start, I want to just double check. Is Tom Pyle on the line? Oh, I see you right there. Okay. All right. Thanks. I was going to skip over if he wasn't ready yet. So as we mentioned in previous meetings, the Cal Green regulations are often necessary to reflect the California administration's overarching sustainable objectives and include work or research that are performed by other state agency experts other than DSA, HCD, or BSC. I would like, in previous meetings, we've had representatives from Air Resources Board and the Energy Commission talking about their subject matter expertise in sustainable subjects. And so I would like to introduce Tom Pyle. Tom Pyle is a Deputy Division Chief and Pavement Engineer for Caltrans, the Division of Maintenance. And Tom and his team have been working on sustainable and cool pavement options for many years. And part of this is pursuant to Senate Bill 296, which is statutes of 2012. Tom is with us today to provide an overview of their work, research, and resources. Another purpose for this is for us to better understand, us being BSC, DSA, and HCD, and the stakeholders to better understand if some of the research and resources can be included in the Cal Green voluntary section, which is A5106.11.1, which is the Hardscape Alternatives that's been in the Cal Green Code for some time. This is also recently issued, this information is also recently issued and noticed in the California Natural Resources Agency Extreme Heat Action Plan. And so this is something that we would like to review this code cycle and see if some of the work can be mentioned in the Cal Green Code. So Tom, I want to thank you for being here today and providing an overview to this work group on the work that Caltrans has already conducted on cool and sustainable pavement. So I'm going to mute myself now and turn it over to Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Marvelli. Can you see my screen? Okay, thank you. I see the head nod and the thumb up. Appreciate that, Larry. In today's world, makes it easier. The screen that I'm looking at, I cannot exactly see your faces. So if somebody has a comment, but it looks like you can see my screen. We're thrilled here at Caltrans to be able to talk about this this bill, AB 296. And so let me get right into it. What does AB 296 say? It's a bill that came out quite a few years ago. It says that the California Environmental Protection Agency shall develop a definition for urban heat island effect. And the definition shall include the extent and severity of urban heat island effect index for California cities, such that cities have a quantifiable goal for heat reduction. Let's really think about that, because what that's saying is that a city might have a very high spike of heat for a short time, which could be equal to a very small degree of heat for a long time. And when we were working on this, and working on this bill and working on this language, we really wanted to make sure that it would include a definition that's quantifiable. But we were also concerned because what is a cool pavement? And how do you define a cool pavement? And are there some other aspects which could possibly be better? So the bill also states that upon completion of the definition for urban heat island effect index, say that quickly, the Department of Transportation shall develop a standard specification for sustainable or cool pavement that can be used to reduce the urban heat island effect index. We feel that as we were looking at this, we had to really approach it from the perspective of what's a cool roof, because the work on cool roofs had already been established, and a cool roof could be steep or white or reflective, or it could be vegetative. So as a cool pavement, we don't really consider slope, right? Because the pavement needs to be flat unless there's an incline, but it's still essentially flat. In Caltrans, we do not give preferential treatment for asphalt or concrete. Unless we're designing an asphalt or a concrete pavement, we do not show preferential treatment as a government agency to one material or the other. And we also can plant trees along the side of the road. So let me explore this a little bit. For a cool pavement could be achieved through a light colored or a high albedo pavement surface.
Tom, can I interrupt for just a second? I apologize.
Yes, please.
You may need to forward your slides because the screen we're seeing is on the first PowerPoint slide, just letting you know.
All right, thank you so much. I thought I was going forward. I hate it when this happens, don't we all?
Tom, it's likely that you have it.
There we go.
Yeah.
That moved.
Okay.
Well, I tried to go to the presentation mode, but apparently I wasn't on the preservation mode.
This mode works. We can see that fine.
Does that work okay? You can just see what's on the side.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, no, thank you, appreciate it. All right. So a cool pavement could, and the previous slides, they only had words, so I was kind of working my way through the words, so you didn't miss any bright or shiny pictures. So a cool pavement, it could be achieved through a light color or a high albedo, highly reflective surface. It could be a permeable pavement, and there could also be shading on it, or there could be buildings around it. It could be within a city that has tall, buildings around it that are also providing shade, or there could be, for instance, there are north-south or east-west orientation, and some other elements that all come together on a pavement could make it pavement. Or if it was a parking lot, of course, there could be trees or buildings next to it, which could in fact be a very conscientious design of a cool pavement. So there is to our conclusion, there's no cool pavement specification, as there's no specification for a cool roof, but there are elements that make it. And again, Caltrans does not show preferential treatment to a material. And as in cool roofs, there are options, and in pavements, there are some options, and some are in fact cooler than others. One of the things about trees I'd like to point out is while we can plant trees in high-speed, highways or on urban streets, we need to really be careful for safety. And while they can shade, as a Department of Transportation, one of our first considerations is going to be the safety of the public in every situation, and to take care of the drivers who in fact might go off the side of the road. And so safety hazards is a big consideration for us. So this is where it really gets exciting for us in Caltrans, and sometimes I think of us in the pavement division as we are literally the division of sustainability. And how is that? And it's by building pavements that last multiple generations, and we use as much recycled material as possible. And we also talk about smoothness. And so for the next 9 or 10 slides, I'm going to explain this and explain how we'd really like to work with you, Director Marvelli. So recycled, we recycle asphalt and concrete and industrial waste and water and shingles and tires and railroad ties and plastic, and the list goes on. And I'm going to get into some of those details. But before I do, I also want to talk about some design aspects that are very conscientious elements that support sustainability. Wow, the S's are really kind of getting me. So we're looking at long life pavements. And in fact, here in Sacramento, we've been a part of building a pavement that's going to last multiple generations, 75 to 100 years. We're working on fuel efficient designs. We are deeply into pavement preservation and recycled materials. A new thing which we are working on is environmental project declarations, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And also environmental life cycle assessment and life cycle cost analysis, although I'm not really going to get into life cycle cost analysis today. So asphalt pavement, what are we doing? Warm asphalt. That is a term which means that we are working on ways that when we produce asphalt, we are producing it at up to 100 degrees less in temperature. Typically, we're heating all of that rock and oil and other, whatever else is in asphalt up to about 350 degrees. And when we can reduce that temperature up to about 250 degrees only and have that massive drop in temperature, the greenhouse gas savings is significant. We're also using rubberized hot mix asphalt where we're recycling material into it to make it last longer. We're using RAP, which is the phrase we use, but it is recycled asphalt pavement. We're figuring out how to put shingles in our asphalt and plastics. We use actually asphalt pavement as water purification to filter out the nasties of, all the cars that go along, right? They have brakes, and what's in a brake? It's nickel and some other heavy metals. And we have permits from the Water Quality Control Board to use open graded asphalt to filter out those nasties before they go into streams and watersheds. We also work on specifically making our pavements smoother for fuel efficiency purposes. Just look at RAP here as one. When we consider how many tons of RAP we are using, we can equate that into million tons, or about the savings are incredible. But to have how many million metric tons of CO2 we're saving, and in addition to that, the cost that we're saving. When we do in-place recycling, and when we dig up the pavement as it sits, and we recycle it with cement and some other oils, and we put it right back down in place, we're not having to, what we call, do a mill and fill, where we take all the pavement out, take it off to the dump, bring in new material, disrupt traffic. It's a huge process to remove and replace a pavement. But we're coming up with ways and putting guides together and working with our industries to develop ways to use in-place recycling. And we talk about this in our department constantly, trying to figure out how to advance this strategy. In concrete pavement, we're working on equally the same number or more of ways to use recycling and to reduce greenhouse gas and to increase sustainability. For instance, we're now designing our pavements with continually reinforced steel. We call it CRCP, but continuously reinforced concrete pavement. Those pavements last longer and we can build them a little bit thinner. We're using supplementary cementitious materials which replace cement, which is among the most greenhouse gas producing products that mankind makes, but we're using supplementary cementitious materials to replace that. And we're working closely with our industry partners to develop that. We're using new cements, which are in fact grinding limestone into the cement to stretch the cement supplies and reduce the CO2 footprint of that cement. We're using recycled concrete aggregate. We are making our pavements smoother so that the vehicles that travel over them are required to use less energy to do so, and they're more fuel efficient. We're pretty excited about this particular one because so many agencies and people and the news, everybody's talking about new engines and batteries and fuel efficient cars. Well, at Caltrans, we're the group that's pretty excited to think that we could make every vehicle that travels over our pavements use less energy, whether that's electric or gasoline. We're putting many types of industrial waste into our concrete, such that we are again stretching the cement and reducing the CO2 footprint. One of those examples is computer chip waste. And another one is rice husk ash. Here in where I live in Sacramento, we have the rice farms around us, and we don't allow it to go into pavements, but we do allow it to be used in sidewalks and a number of other of our concrete structures that we call minor concrete. We wouldn't use it in a bridge, but we do allow our contractors to use rice husk ash that comes from the power cogeneration plants here in the Sacramento Valley. We use a lot of recycled aggregates in our concrete. We use both recycled asphalt pavement and recycled concrete aggregates. Here's some pictures of, some examples of where we're digging up concrete. But we use it both in the base and the sub base, and in some cases in the concrete itself. So I talked about this idea called life cycle assessment, LCA. In parentheses in small text, if you can read that, I say think food label. That's what this is it's basically a food label of thinking about how all of the constituent parts of that material. And as we think about the material through a life cycle assessment, we're also We're also thinking about transporting the material and the construction and the use phase and the maintenance and rehabilitation and end of life. We're thinking about all of the parts of the cycle over the life of these materials, and we're calling this an environmental life cycle assessment. Let me explain this a little bit more. We have a program. We've been working with the University of California at Davis. They have a group out there called the Pavement Research Center. So we call it the Ccrc if you hear that acronym. But we've been developing for the last few years a web-based tool. And there's a number of ways that we can look at this, the materials that we use, whether it's aggregate or oils or cements or putting it all together to make concrete or asphalt or other materials as well. But we can look at the materials only, and we call that cradle to laid. Clever as we could be on this. We could think a little bit more through the life cycle and include the whole use stage, and that's all the vehicles that are traveling over it. But we're also trying to expand the thought such that we're not just ending it where it was from cradle to laid or cradle to grave, but cradle to cradle. So we're thinking about the next use of that material. One of my last couple slides here is we are focusing around the state. We put GPS coordinates in Caltrans in every crack, rut, and bump in our network. We know where the roughest pavements are. We know where the cracks and the ruts and the potholes, we know where they all are. Every single year we take an analysis of our pavements. And we've been trying to be a little bit more clever about it now, with having SB1 money and a little bit more money to be more strategic about the projects that we build. And we're specifically looking at locations that have rough pavement that obviously would require a lot of energy for those vehicles to travel over them. And then those with the highest traffic count. So when we put the highest traffic count on top of the roughest pavements, we can find those locations. Sometimes they're less than a mile long. And we're strategically going to be going in and smoothing those pavements out purely for the purpose of reducing greenhouse gas of the vehicles that travel over them. It's kind of quiet behind the scenes, it's not a flashy kind of a work, but we're pretty passionate here in the pavement program about figuring out ways to reduce. So my last slide is to kind of tie a bow around all of this, Director Marvelli, is, how is Caltrans meeting AB 296? Caltrans is meeting the goals of AB 296 by creating specifications for sustainable pavement that reduce greenhouse gas and increase sustainability. I have provided you also a handout, and you can share that as you wish. And I think you have some ways to share that. We put it together a number of years ago, but it's a list of all of the specifications, and we would be very happy to work with Building Standards Commission to further develop some of these ideas for sustainable pavements, for recycling materials, using additional materials within them, thinking about a longer design life, thinking about ways to shade for cool pavements or to consider that as well. But thank you for the time. I really appreciate an opportunity to work with you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I see how this now extends well beyond the limits of Title 24 for building. So something we want to consider is, how this would apply to on-site pavement, as opposed to, I see the visual now of highways, freeways, and things like that, but also then the concrete aspect of walks, walkways, things like that. I'll open it up to the group if you have any questions for Mr. Pyle. I'm looking for some hands raised. I don't see any. Do you see any? I see one, maybe Tom Phillips. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Phillips?
Good morning. I was just wondering about your life cycle assessment. We're hearing about highways and bridges and things buckling during heat waves. So I'm wondering how you're factoring in climate change and projections to when you're upgrading or building new highways and so on.
Great question. So let me just real quick talk about some of the buckling that occurs. There have been some buckling of pavements around California, and very quickly I can tell you, because I've been out on the exploration about why that happens. And the pavements that have buckled around around Davis, so on Highway 505, near where you live, there has been buckling over the years. That occurs because those pavements were built in the winter when everything was as small and as contracted as it could be. And what's left to do but expand when it gets hot. And when we have hot days and hot nights, it all expands and boom, we get buckling. That is a design issue that is not related to climate change. In terms of climate change, pavements are absolutely able to address this because we can use oils around the state that are made for these hotter temperatures. For instance, the oils that we typically use along the coast are not the same oils that we would use, say, in the Mojave Desert. So if temperatures are rising, I can just tell everybody on this call that in terms of the oils that we would use, we can address that such that we're not going to have issues with asphalt pavements. In terms of concrete pavements, there's other ways to address that with the coefficient of thermal expansion for the aggregates that we use, and we test that. No matter what that expansion rate is, we can design that in such that pavements, sidewalks, parking lots, and all of that can be well protected for their lifespan for climate change.
Mia, if I may interrupt, for those who have questions, if you could please state your name and who you represent before you ask your question, just so we can capture that in the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Ida. Sorry about that. Yeah. I see Christos, and then we'll go to Lindsay Danner after Christos.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Christos Chrysiliou, Director of Architecture and Engineering with the Unified School District. Tom, great presentation. Thank you. I wanted to ask a couple of questions about, in terms of the pavement and playgrounds. For us, we're dealing with a lot of our school playgrounds. And I wanted to see if your study can expand, definitely look at playgrounds. And in a lot of the cases, we look at reflective coating and how we can apply reflective coating to existing asphalt, or we develop new asphalt areas. And if it's something that perhaps can study the benefits of both reflective coating versus the pavements that you're looking at, and see if there's some more efficiency or the sustainability aspect of products of using pavement with integral colors, perhaps, or something that we don't have to do the things, we don't have to do this, application twice, where we install pavement and then, or in this case, the asphalt, and then we put the reflective coatings on top, or even something more beneficial to that. So I don't know if your study will expand and I guess share more information in that aspect.
You know what? We did not look into playgrounds and such, obviously being the highway department. But look, I can tell you straight up, I mean, like in terms of temperature, we've gone out with temperature gun on asphalt and concrete. And I can tell you that if you were to, kind of strategically choose locations for, like where the children are going to be more, and to use a lighter colored material, if you were to choose a concrete material, you can do coloring in the concrete, or you can paint it as well. And it'll last for decades and decades and decades. So the concrete materials could be of extreme advantage for you there in terms of temperature. Likewise, you could use an asphalt. Asphalt tends to get lighter as time goes on. You could choose some rocks in the asphalt that are whiter or lighter colored to reduce that, to bring them into a lighter color as, for less temperature or temperature holding. Anyway, I think in terms of playgrounds, though, that's one of the areas where you could really address the temperature issue.
Yeah, and we're looking at and studying looking at specifications and starting to see different options. I was just thinking in terms of if you're getting into the depth of the analysis and understanding the cost, and at least the longevity you get out of the materials, you're developing and putting together, perhaps it's something for us to learn and use and have that cost benefit analysis and see what's better if we were to replace one material with another. So if there's any information you have and you want to share, that would be great.
Well, I can tell you, like with the concrete, you can certainly make it, it doesn't have to be it could be thin is the point I'm trying to make. And the issue with concrete is you would then be using a saw to cut it into smaller squares so that it's not going to crack. As it shrinks, it tends to do that. And so you could really have some quite attractive playgrounds with a thin concrete overlay that would be white in color. Another advantage is if you have, say you have some schools where you have a very old asphalt and you wanted to have a cool pavement, Christos, one of the things you could do is you can do a bonded concrete overlay. We've built highways this way where we place it right on top of the cracked asphalt, and as cracked as it is, it doesn't matter. It does not make a single bit of difference. And you can place a very thin concrete overlay over the asphalt. You don't have to remove it. You can save some money there, and slice it up, cut it with a diamond saw out there, and you can do some rehab as well.
I appreciate that, Tom. And for us, I don't want to appear like, we're going to put more asphalt or concrete on our schools. We're more supportive in terms of schoolyards and greening, but where I have to maintain play stations like, basketball courts or any other courts that require a hard surface, perhaps there's some options there that I can be able to kind of look at other materials to extend that sustainable side of at least creating something that's going to last longer and it can be used as more permeable, and I can be able to meet the goals that we set in place for us to become more sustainable in terms of our schoolyards.
Yeah,
that's what I was hearing.
Sure. There are also both asphalt and concrete options that kind of look like caramel corn. You make it only with pea gravel, and it is permeable. Because the air flows through it, it can be cooler. And for walkways and areas where it's not playing basketball or something, it could be a really good option to put groundwater back in so it doesn't flow off, and also to have a cooler surface. Great questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Lindsay, you're next.
Hi, thank you. I just had a quick question. I was wondering if you were I'm with the Grossmont High School District. Just curious if you were going to start electrifying your fleet.
I can tell you that Caltrans has a goal to electrify its fleet. Absolutely. I don't know what the dates on it are, but I know that our equipment shop is moving to, as we are replacing vehicles, we are now moving into electric fleet for the department.
Greg, Dick, you're next. Greg's with Cal Recycle. I haven't seen you. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Mia. Thank you. Hi, Tom. Great job as usual. As you probably know, Cal Green has a C&D construction demolition diversion requirement, and one of the materials in that C&D waste stream has always been, asphalt shingles, and they've been very problematic for markets as an end use. And I know Caltrans has been a good partner over the years trying to develop, specifications for the use of RAS. But one of the barriers has typically been, district engineers approving projects. I was just curious if you're aware of any district projects that have gone forward using more RAS.
Hey, Greg, we and everybody, Caltrans built the very first California pavement that I'm aware of using shingles. And shingles are awesome because they have sand and grit and fiber and oil in them, everything that we want to use in a pavement. The problem is it's been sitting up on a roof and drying out for 20, 30, 40 years. So it's very stiff. We can only put about 3% in by weight, but the project we built performed exactly as we anticipated that it would. And we are going to be moving actually much faster than Caltrans typically does at our glacial speed, but we're going to be moving very quickly, which means maybe within the next year we would have a specification for use where contractors could choose to use that, and it doesn't have to be specified. We were very happy with the results we got, and we're going to be moving forward with an allowance to use shingles.
Thanks, Tom. I'd love to talk to you more offline about those projects.
You bet.
Eric, I see your hand raised, and then if we don't have anybody else after Eric, I'd like to move on to item 4. So Eric, go ahead.
Thank you, Mia. Really appreciate all the information. Sorry, I'll introduce myself again. Eric Drever, Principal Architect, DSA. Really appreciate all the information. And there seems to be a lot of overlap between, of course, roofing and pavements, simply because they tend to be more horizontal surfaces, similar in reflectivity if you use reflection. I know there's actually been a fair amount, and there are standards for measuring cool roofs, specifically asphalt shingles, which was mentioned as potentially being used in your wrap. But there are measurements and standards that have been created for reflective aggregates within composite shingles. And I'm curious if that concept has been studied at all for asphalt pavements, including reflective aggregates to allow for a cooler asphalt, similar to asphalt shingles.
That is a great question, and I'd love to hear that and talk about that. And I am very familiar with this reflective aspect of shingles. You know, here's the deal within pavements is that pavement is entirely embedded, if we're going to talk about asphalt pavement, within the asphalt itself. The only option for there to be the aggregate on the surface is when we would use what we call a chip seal. So this is a product or a process where we're, putting some oil on the surface of the road, dropping rock on top of it, and then rolling that rock into the oil. The oil is perhaps 1/8 of an inch thick, and it just squeezes up and around the surface of the rock, but the rock is the exposed surface. That is the only option we would have for considering reflectivity, and we chose not to really chase that very much. And the reason is because if we're choosing a rock that's very nearby our project and the size of California, we might fortunately have a rock that is reflective, but we wouldn't want to pay the additional charge for shipping or to expend the additional greenhouse gas to ship an aggregate that in fact might be reflective. So great question, but we're not really exploring that within the department, within Caltrans.
And I see Janet Dixon. You have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yes, I do. Thank you. This really doesn't have to do with the reflectivity so much. I'm taking advantage of the fact that we've got Cal Recycle on here. I get notification for the recycling of rubber tires and using that in pavement. And that comes out a couple times a year. But schools don't qualify. And I'm literally laying acres of asphalt this summer, replacing parking lots. So if, when the state does these programs, if they can keep in mind that school districts, we have a lot of asphalt, playgrounds, parking lots. We're big consumers of that. Maybe not as much as cities with streets, but we do have an awful lot of it. Thank you. Oh, I didn't say, I'm with Temecula Valley Unified and the School Energy Coalition.
Temecula Valley? Is that what you
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Southern California?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah. All right. Okay. So, Tom, I really want to thank you for providing this information. I look forward to us discussing offline. Do you know there's albeit a small regulation in Calgary right now with some reference standards. I think it's something to look at with your team and see if that warrants modification at this time. I don't know if anyone on the line wants to be involved in that sidebar conversation, but what we plan on doing is taking a look at this with Caltrans, and it would be part of our draft regulations if we do decide to make any changes to that. So thank you very much for the overview, Tom, and we may hit you up for some more information in the future.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for your hard work. It's fascinating to find out, you know, we're not always exposed to what the other state agencies are doing, and that seems like just a ton of research and a lot of time to devote to something that we take for granted that we drive through every day. So thank you very much.
Well, we love what we do, so we're always, you know, looking for additional partners and folks who are interested in it, and somebody who'll sit still and listen to us talk about pavement for a few minutes.
I know. All right, thank you so much. John, I see John McHugh has his hand up.
Yeah, this is John McHugh Energy. I was trying to understand your last statement about reference standards for cowways, for roadways. Is this a discussion about including roadway requirements in CalGreen or in some other regulation?
No, I'm sorry, I misspoke. So CalGreen has a reference standard for cool pavement right now in its voluntary regulations, or I don't know if it's a standard, but it has it points to certain things. And so we just want to make clear if we need to make adjustments in CalGreen for on-site use and make any changes to that, not including roadways in Title 24. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Alrighty. Sure. Okay. I'm going to move on to item 4, which is the design and industry professional presentation. I would really like to welcome today. We have several members from the concrete and cement industry to present on behalf of their organizations. I believe we have Nathan Forrest on the line. Nathan is a civil engineer and environmental specialist. He's the technical director for California Nevada Cement Association. And then we also, I believe we have Charlie Ray on the call as well. He's the director of communications and safety and technical services with the California Construction and Industrial Materials Association. And I don't know who wants to go first or how you want to lay this out. So maybe I'll turn it over to Nathan and you can speak on behalf of the group.
Well, thank you very much for having us out today. We do have a presentation for the group, and actually, I think we're going to lead it off with our executive director from the California Nevada Cement Association, Tom Tietz.
Thank you, Nate. I am also going to try to share my screen here, and I have to say that following Tom Pyle is a tough act. So I hope I can positively provide a good follow-up. Can everyone see my screen there? Can someone let me know?
Yes.
Perfect. So yeah, thank you, Tom, for your insight there. It's always great working with you. I just, interesting topic because our association does get very involved in pavements as well as buildings and are looking at solutions oftentimes at the project level. So we're a resource for that for anybody on the line here, but that's not really what we're here to talk about this afternoon or this morning. The California cement and concrete industry, we do have some things to share with the group this morning that we think are very important. And we are very grateful to be a part of the Cal Green Carbon Reduction Collaborative. This morning, you'll hear briefly from 4 associations. It'll be me starting off with the California Nevada Cement Association. We'll hear from Charlie Ray at CalCEMA, and just a slide each from both the National Ready Mix Concrete Association and the American Concrete Institute's New Center. One thing that I think is worth mentioning today specifically is that June 30th, 2022 is the exact midpoint between 2000 and the end of 2045. And if we look at the trajectory of where the state of California is moving, this is a significant day. Now, on this slide, you can see where we've come and where we're going. So as of 2020, the state reached its goals of AB 32 to be below 1990 levels of GHG emissions by 2020. The state, by law, must now reach 40% below 1990 levels by 2030, and then with that ultimate goal of reaching carbon neutrality by 2045. That is what's guiding our future and what our industry wants to be participating in moving forward. We want to follow that trajectory and are making commitments to get there. I also think it's important to look at California specifically, because these goals are specific to our state, and it's important to see where emissions come from right here in California, inside of our borders. So if you look at this graphic, you can see from the data from CARB showing buildings in the yellow there, almost 9% of the state's emissions. In the blue section, you can see industry, just over 21% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the state. And in the upper left there, you see cement. We are 1.8% of California's greenhouse gas emissions. And cement is the regulated sector for cement and concrete. So we are the entity that's regulated by the Air Resources Board under the Cap and Trade program. And we've been collaborating very well with that agency since its inception. What's interesting to note, you see that 1.8% there. Cement typically makes up roughly 85% of the greenhouse gas emissions for concrete. So you don't see concrete on the list because there are well into the hundreds of ready-mix companies and concrete producers using that cement in their products. And so I just think it's important to put that in perspective. You don't see other building materials necessarily on that industrial side because they're often imported from other places. In fact, a portion of the cement used in California is also imported from overseas. The asphalt that Tom Pyle was talking about would fit under the refinery section, under that 7% section of industry. So what is the cement industry doing about this? Last year, we put together a commitment, a carbon neutrality plan that outlines 3 pathways and 9 levers to achieve carbon neutrality for a very difficult to decarbonize industry. And what we've done in outlining these pathways and these levers, we've also identified where we need help. If you look at the pace of change that needs to happen in the next 22.5 years, things have to change. We have to be able to improve the way we make cement at a faster clip than we are now. And in order to do that, if you look at the first 2 columns there, we need legislative assistance in 6 out of these 9 levers and regulatory assistance in 8 out of these 9 levers. And I want to mention that we're very proud that that plan became part of the foundation. Really, it is the foundation for the first sector-specific bill in California history to focus on achieving net zero emissions. So last year, we worked closely with Senator Josh Becker and the Natural Resources Defense Council to come up with a way to put together the guidelines that CARB can put in place in order for us to reach these very aggressive goals. So we're proud of that and are just starting now to work with that implementation team. But the last thing I want to mention is that I think this bill is a good example of when industry gets involved from the beginning, things go well. We've had other examples of legislation where we haven't been involved at the beginning, and oftentimes those don't go as well. So in the case of the Building Standards Commission and the effort here with the collaborative, we dearly and deeply want to get engaged when we're focusing specifically on our industry. And we're used to doing this. We're engaged with agencies, both at the state and local level, and even providing design assistance at the project level with architects and engineers to improve their specifications for cement on a regular basis. Next, I want to go to Charlie Ray, and we'll let Charlie talk about ready-mix concrete in California.
Thank you, Tom. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Just briefly, CalCEMA, or the California Construction and Industrial Materials Association, is a trade association for aggregate, ready-mix concrete, asphalt, and other mineral producers in California. And kind of like Tom, I just kind of wanted to, give you a brief recap of what concrete producers have been trying to do to lower the carbon impact, and then two, just kind of, recap some of the challenges. But I'd say on the first one, and what producers have been trying to do, ever since AB 32 or earlier, I mean, they've been very conscious of the carbon impact of the product and trying to do things to reduce it to the extent they can. And this has meant working with a lot of the agencies, ARB, Caltrans particularly, on specifications, state architect, doing things to try to lower the carbon impact of the materials we use in the product. Also working separately, on our fleets, the concrete producers trying to make their fleets cleaner, cleaner fuels, doing just other innovative things like incorporating, carbon from other industries into the product to help reduce the overall impact. But having said all that, as with the cement producers, we've worked closely with the Senator Becker and the Natural Resources Defense Council on legislation. Particularly the last year and a half, we worked with them on the bill SB 778, which is main purpose was to add concrete to the Buy Clean California Act. But concrete, I'll explain it a little bit, is, there are a lot of difficulties. It's not quite the one size fits all product that you may get out of a single plant. And so it's just a more difficult material to incorporate into Buy Clean. So we spent a ton of time the last year and a half working with NRDC and Senator Becker to try to craft a bill that was workable, that understood all the different aspects of concrete and concrete production. And you can see on the screen there that some of the concepts there, certainly putting in global warming potential limits, requiring submittal of environmental product declarations, incentives to go to lower levels, and importantly too, to start developing performance specifications. That's a pretty critical thing because most specifications now are very prescriptive, probably actually, end up requiring more use of cement than is really needed. And if you can get to a performance spec, it provides a lot more flexibility in the options of materials that a producer can use in a given situation. So unfortunately that bill didn't pass, but I think it set the groundwork for how you would have to address concrete in a Buy Clean, procurement type program. So I think you can go to the next slide, Tom. Next slide.
Did that go through, Charlie? This was the first slide. Here's the second slide.
Yeah, so you can go to.
Let me go to the next one.
So, okay. So the next one, whoops, go back one. The prior slide, it just recaps some of the other efforts we've undertaken with other agencies to again, reduce the carbon impact. And a lot of this is with Caltrans, but important one from our perspective was to allow the use of returned plastic concrete. This is something that ARB had identified in initial discussions after AB 32 as an important area. And the specification developed was actually the first in the country. And it helped ignite some more national changes in codes also. Importantly, when we work with Caltrans, it's usually to try to get them to help us, use more sustainable materials such as cements that have a lower carbon, or blended cements, or different supplementary cementitious materials, or blended supplementary materials on the one hand, and then also ways to reuse the waste, whether that's or the returned material. So the returned plastic concrete, the recycled aggregates in different applications. As you can see, there's other initiatives. Some cities and counties are farther ahead in some things in some ways, like such as city of San Francisco. But anyway, that just shows there's multiple efforts going on. You can go to the next slide.
See the next slide there, Charlie?
Yeah. And just lastly, kind of, the second part, I just wanted to kind of, recap some of the challenges for concrete producers. On the one hand, as I say, it's produced from many plants throughout the state. There's at least around 300 production plants for concrete, and that's in every part of the state. So each plant has some unique issues or challenges of their own, and that means they can have entirely different raw materials, which can be the rock and the sand, the cement, water, just conditions in that area. So it's always very challenging, and it's hard to have a one size fits all essentially. And then the other aspect is that the end product can vary quite a bit. And so concrete producers are constantly having to, change the mix of materials, proportions of materials to achieve different purposes. Building a road is entirely different from building a building or a sidewalk or whatever. And there's just different requirements as far as, say, strength or timing of the material to set and harden. And again, varying by strength and other different factors. So I think, I think that's, one of the reasons that the bill SB 778 went into a lot of detail is just trying to account for all these different factors, and that things can change, rapidly sometimes, and we have to have some room for adjustment. So I think that kind of recaps everything. I think the other thing is just to keep in mind, we certainly keep trying to work to get more towards performance specs that give more flexibility in the use of materials and don't over specify the amount of cement that needs to be used. So I think that's good.
Next, I have one slide here from NRMCA, and their contact today wasn't able to make it. But one thing that is encouraging is that they continue to track the carbon footprint of ready-mix concrete throughout the country. As you can see in this image, they're making an improvement year after year. The other thing I wanted to mention about NRMCA is that they're really good at diving into specifications for specific firms. Oftentimes things are out of date, or many times, having been an architect once too, you use standards over and over again, specs from the previous job, and then it goes on for years. What they can do is identify efficiencies to change your specifications so that they're greener. And some of these are very easy to do. So that's one excellent resource from NRMCA. They're also a certified entity doing environmental product declarations. And next, I will ask ACI. Angela?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Tom. So Andrew Shocker, I'm with a brand new Center of Excellence for Carbon Neutral Concrete that the American Concrete Institute has launched. As many of you may know, ACI is the place where we have, or does the concrete building codes, specifications. It's a long established, over 100-year institute. And the consensus-based process takes time, and ACI decided to have a subsidiary focusing on this carbon neutral concrete item because we need to move fast. We're already behind. And as you've heard from Tom and Charlie, there's a lot of complexity to the concrete industry, and there's a lot of regionality to the concrete industry. We have a lot of work being done across the country and across the world. There's some real impacts being made with different suppliers, different ready mixers, different organizations. But one of the difficult pieces is that it's not presenting a unified front. So we have to get beyond the language of concrete's bad or cement is bad and move forward knowing that we can make such a big impact because of our contributions to global warming. So ACI's News Center, so NEU as in neutral, I've got a vision and mission up here, but want to just mention that what we're trying to do is provide a non-trade type organization that has a long history as a consensus-based, with consensus-based processes, that has a pretty darn good reputation worldwide, that we're trying to bring that front together and use this center, which is funded from ACI as well as member organizations such as large scale owners like Meta has joined this organization to try to move things forward in a unified manner, support with staffing what needs to have happen to fill in any gaps to move this process. And so we're really interested in what CalGreen California is doing as a leader in this area. And so we're happy to be involved in any way we can. We are considering, or we're planning to do assessments and validations as part of this for new materials and new processes. That's one of the core functions, as well as model code and education. If we need to use the certification arm or the university arm of ACI, those are also available to us. So we're looking for ways to help and move this forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. This is Tom again. The one thing I just want to leave everyone with is that we appreciate this opportunity to speak at this webinar, but I'll reiterate the fact that we're willing and ready to get involved in the details too. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very much appreciated. Thank you for that overview. And I had heard when that there are modifications happening at the model code level with in the International Building Code regarding the concrete standards there. I'm not sure what those are, but I had heard that was happening. So thank you. It was good to hear from you, Andrea. I appreciate that. I see that. Do any of the state agencies have any questions for the concrete group and the cement group? If before we go to questions from folks on the line, I see Camille has her hand raised. Does anyone from DSA or HCD have a question? I don't see anybody. Okay. Well, Camille, and I'm using people's first names because the last names are sometimes cut off on the view I see, so I apologize for that. So Camille, if you want to go ahead with your question.
Hi, I'm so sorry. Actually, that was an accidental hand raise.
Okay, no problem. All right, I see Luke, and then we'll go to Webley after Luke.
Hi there, my name is Luke Lombardi. I'm a structural engineer and sustainability consultant with Pro-Happold, as well as a member of Ccrc. And I just wanted to revisit one slide that Tom touched on at the very beginning. And first off, I would say thanks for the presentation. And Tom, Nate, Andrea, really appreciate the work that you do. And I totally agree that there's a lot of work to be done with performance-based specifications, and appreciate the efforts on moving towards Portland limestone cement and that sort of thing. I would just touch on the first slide that it said, I think it was 1.4% of contributions coming from cement in California. I don't know if that's just looking at the chemical reactions, but I would just say for the broader group, that carb data is available. I just downloaded it, and just for a quick fact check, I'm getting more, when I look at cement plants, it's more like 7%. So just to reinforce the fact that this is a really important material and it has a big impact on our buildings as well as our transportation. And I don't know if Tom or Nate, if you want to give context of if that's looking at a certain.
Luke, I think that's an important point to bring up. You'll often see that 7% number for global cement emissions, but in America, it's around 1.25, California 1.8. It's much higher in other countries. Like I think in Vietnam, I saw figure where it's 25% of the emissions of that country?
Yeah, so I don't know if I can share my screen if that's allowed in this setting, but I mean, that was from the CARB data, the same California data, I think, and that's just total greenhouse gas emissions. So just to I don't know, am I allowed to share a screen or not? And if anyone else has clarifications on that, I just don't want to lower, the impact of what we're talking here. It is very important, and it is not just like a 1% sliver of emissions.
Understood.
I think it's true for steel as well, which you don't see on that graphic from the CARB data. But if you're looking specifically at California production, that's what I was trying to emphasize in that slide with that data from CARB.
Yeah, and I don't want to get into the weeds. I just want to say, I don't know if that's just not looking at, the energy emissions also related with cement, or
energy and process emissions.
Yeah, and I would just say I just downloaded the same data and filtered for cement plants, and it's 7%. So not to take that off, but
Luke, your point that it's a piece, whatever that piece is, however you slice it, and there's a lot of room for impact, and that I think is your main point, and that's
main
very
point.
true.
Yeah,
Yep.
Totally agree. Thanks, Sandra.
Understood. I see Webley Bowles with New Building Institute is on the line.
Hey there, this is Webley Bowles, New Buildings Institute. I got a question for Charlie. Since Senate Bill 778 didn't move forward, I'm curious to know about the potential future of it. It was my understanding that the contractors were concerned about the performance calculation and having to do that for different mixes. So I'm curious if there's been conversations around how to overcome that. Could a policy look maybe more like Marin County, where you have GWP limits per different regions, or other ways that kind of simplifies it and makes it aligned more with the other materials in ByClean?
Yeah. So I don't know ultimately what the next step is. I think everyone has to regroup and figure out, where there was a disconnect and where we would go forward. I think one issue that they had, that my sense of their overriding issue was that the bill was written to say that the GWP levels could be on a project basis, not necessarily on a mix basis, and that was an issue they had, because there could be, say, 4 or 5 different mixes being used in different applications in a project, and it would be up to them to be responsible for that overall number, whereas they don't actually produce the material. So I think that's one area that we have to address. Certainly, another thing, I think in the testimony, they were concerned about their liability, because ultimately they could be liable. We thought again, both those things we thought we did tried to address in the bill and had some options on and everything. But so I don't know if that answers your questions, but I think we have to regroup, and those are probably 2 areas I think that have to be looked at.
Do you have any comments on a policy that could look similar to the Marin County with the GWP limits per that mix, and maybe that's expanded per different regions of California?
Yeah, I hadn't necessarily heard that beyond offhand, but since ByClean California kind of has its own structure, but that's probably an open question. Yeah.
Thanks.
I see that Tom Phillips has his hand raised.
Hi, thank you for all of the great presentations. Tom Phillips, Healthy Building Research, Davis, and Technical Advisor for Collaborative for High Performance Schools and other groups. I just want to add a footnote about the GHG emissions for concrete and pavements, and kind of a pet peeve. And I'm sure this is kind of one of the key concerns for this group, is the time-sensitive value of embedded carbon, which is not reflected in those kind of gross emission numbers. So I would suspect that, say, for concrete and asphalt, that time-sensitive issue front loading these carbon emissions would even make the impact greater in terms of climate change. And I don't know if anybody's actually done that, for California. It's probably been done by IPCC or others, but in any case, it sounds like we're moving in the right direction.
Very good. I see that John McHugh has his hand up.
Thank you. Because the carbon emissions from cement production is not just the carbon that's involved in the heat addition, but also the heat released during the calcining process. In terms of the vision for the future, in terms of reduction, in terms of the vision for carbon reductions from cement, is this necessarily involving carbon capture and storage? It seems like a lot of the discussion here has also been about, of course, trying to reduce the amount of cement in concrete mixes. And then finally, in regards to environmental product declarations, is this based on industry-wide product declarations, or are sort of the California and Nevada manufacturers going to be trying to differentiate themselves by saying, look, we're using less carbon because we're doing carbon capture or some other mechanism of reducing carbon emissions during production? Thank you.
And John, this is Tom T. So I'm going to try to answer the first part of your question about whether we're addressing, I believe it's all sorts of emissions from cement production. And you hit on an important point. Roughly 40% of the emissions come from the energy required to produce the heat required to essentially melt limestone. And that process of essentially making man-made lava to create a chemical change in limestone naturally releases that CO2. So that's 60+% of our emissions that are process emissions. One of the first ways we can address that is by utilizing something like a blended cement, Portland limestone cement, hopefully more ternary blends in the future, other applications of supplementary cementitious materials in cement production. But carbon capture is absolutely essential in our overall plan to reach carbon neutrality by 2045. We don't see any other way to get to zero without it. So I wanted to address that first. And then your second question about EPDs, I may ask Charlie to address that one, since you're typically looking for EPDs for concrete on projects, not specifically for cement.
So I would say that they're plant specific EPDs. They're not just relying on some national number, but they're third-party verified plant specific. I mean, sometimes I know that relies on underlying, national numbers, but generally even some of the inputs they have EPDs on the inputs. I think most of the cement producers will have their own EPDs for cement, so that'll be factored in. And then, some of the aggregate producers or some of the aggregate sources have EPDs, not a lot yet, but there's definitely more movement that direction. So I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Yeah, that's extremely helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I think it talks about, visions for the future as well. Thanks.
Okay, very good. I don't see any other hands raised at this time. Barbara, do you see anybody over there? And nobody on the call? No. Well, I could ask. Yeah. I'm sorry. Is there anyone on the phone that wants to chime in at this time? You can unmute yourselves and chime in. I don't hear anybody. All right. Well, I think for item 4, the design industry, I really appreciate the concrete and cement folks on the line. We look forward to working with you closely. as we move forward with these discussions and trying to determine what is a good solution in the interim cycle versus long-term solutions moving forward. And for us to better understand what's already happening in the industry, I think is key here too. My thought, unless anyone has any objections, is this is a good time to take, we'll do a 10-minute break. Take a 10-minute break. And when we resume, we're going to come back to the homework assignment. And I'll just key this up a little bit. We've got the AIA that wants to provide a presentation, and then I know that anyone else on the line can participate. I don't know if the concrete industry wants to go over a letter they sent as well, CalCEMA. And then anyone else who wants to present homework assignments, and then we'll go to item 6 after that. I think we're fairly close to being on schedule. Eric, I see your hand is up.
Thank you, Mia. I just thought I would mention before we go on break, if somebody wants to use the break to enter in their data onto the MS Forms link that I've pasted into the chat, feel free to do so. We've got about another 13 folks who have logged on today and entered in their information, so they should be receiving an email in their listed email address to the DSA box, and they can get set up by following the links in that email.
Thanks, Eric. So how about we come back at 10:40? Does that work, Barbara? Okay, we'll resume at 10:40. So I'm going to mute myself here in the room, and I'm going to stop sharing my video for about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to share my screen really quickly here. Let's try to do this. And then I will unshare because I know that there's others who are going to provide a presentation. So let me try this again. I just do that. Can you see that homework slide better?
I can.
Okay. All right. So we're on agenda item number 5. This is the homework that was provided at the May 19th meeting. And the ask was to have folks possibly identify code changes of interest to your organization. And maybe do a presentation to keep it concise. And if the code change is an easy fix to the code, and if so, how and why. This is sort of to help us focus on what could be accomplished in the short term, long term. And does the code change need more research on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe, necessitate, does this need a subgroup? And are any of the code sections obsolete or irrelevant? That would be helpful too. And provide reference documentation such as reports, documents relied upon, research that's been done, and then if there is cost of compliance if applicable. And we could talk a little bit more perhaps at the next meeting about cost of compliance, because that gets a little complex on what the state agencies need to perform in order to support code change. So I know that the AIA has developed a presentation and I'll let them go first. I just want to let everyone on the call know that they're going to exceed the 4-minute mark because they really took a deep dive into a lot of aspects of CalGreen. I think they have a number of speakers, and we will have a Q&A after they do their presentation. And I imagine there'll be a number of questions about that. So we'll try to keep that within a 20 to 30 minute conversation. And then we'll move on to other folks who want to provide an overview of the homework that they provided. So I'm going to unshare my screen right now and turn it over to Michael Malinowski. Is that okay to turn it over to you? All right, so let me stop sharing here.
Sarah, can you share your screen? Sarah Vasquez from AIA California is going to be running our slideshow. I'm Mike Malinowski, speaking on behalf of the 11,000 design professional members of the American Institute of Architects, California. Next slide. It's exciting to be here. In fact, these presentations that have preceded this really inspiring. It really shows that there's a broad recognition that there's no business as usual. There's an urgent need to change things quickly. And I'm excited to be part of a team that spans across over a dozen organizations and included some of our country's top experts in sustainability, decarbonization, and embodied carbon. We've got a lot to cover. And for that reason, we're going to be skipping introductions and we won't be getting into all the details. Everything we're showing, plus a lot of background information and additional materials, will be available in the Ccrc repository. Next slide. This is an outline of what we're going to cover. To give you an idea of the breadth and scope, we've taken this homework assignment that Ida Claire put forward very seriously, and in fact have put in a huge amount of time by many, many people to put this together. Our primary thrust is to briefly describe 3 carefully selected paths to bring embodied carbon into CalGreen in the current mid-cycle process. These are moves that we believe are ready to take now. We will also introduce a matrix of CalGreen housekeeping, because we, like many others, believe when you add something in, you should always be looking what can be taken out, what can be simplified, what's obsolete, what's no longer needed. And finally, we will look ahead toward what seems like incredibly far off, but the next actual triennial code cycle for those items that we acknowledge will require additional runway for research and development. And we'll do a very brief run through of those and provide a link to one-pagers that cover each of these topics. Next slide. Without further ado, let's talk about embodied carbon now for mid-cycle CalGreen. Bruce King, please take it away.
Thanks, Mike, and good morning, everybody. Next. 49 years ago, some of you were around when the Arab oil embargo sent energy prices skyrocketing upwards, and everybody was in a panic talking about producing more domestic energy, building nuclear plants, doing everything we could to make up the deficit. And along comes this mild-mannered nuclear physicist who says, what if we just made all of our devices more efficient? And the rest was history. Here we are half a century later, and we're in climate emergency, talking about emissions much more than energy. They're related, but they're not the same thing. But a similar dynamic is at play here in that everybody's thinking in an old mindset of like, how can we be better, have better light bulbs, better air conditioners, more insulation, all of which is good, but being so obsessed with that we miss some of the big opportunities that are here to reduce emissions and meet our climate goals. I and my colleagues are going to show you a few of those missing bits that we want to draw to your attention. Next, please. You see all sorts of numbers. We already have this morning of how much anything contributes to the total picture globally or in California. But a very big chunk of it all is just making building materials, primarily cement and steel and other metals. Next. The thing about that so-called embodied carbon, the upstream emissions of making the materials we build stuff with, the asphalt and concrete paving, the buildings, everything, is that it has a time value. This is something that Tom Phillips was trying to talk about a moment ago in his question, because they go up in the air right away, long before you ever move into your new building project. Those are up in the air cooking away. It's the amount of the emissions times the time it's in the air. And so it has a time value that exacerbates what those materials are. Next, please. By many people's estimation, that means that if you build something this year, 3/4 of your climate impact is from the materials you chose to build with. That's going to vary up and down, of course, depending on the project and where you are and a lot of things, but it's a huge chunk. It's not trivial. Next, please. Next. Well, we've covered this, I think. You all get the picture. EPDs, environmental product declarations, are how we measure what we're going to have to manage. And they're just like the nutrition labels that we see on food. Next, please. When you gather up a bunch of EPDs for any particular product, a doorknob or a cubic yard of concrete, eventually you start to get a bell curve and you can say, this is my industry average or my regional average. And then you can set policy. That's how you do it. Say, we're going to go up above that, give you another 25, 30, 40% above that. And then anything above that line is no good anymore. We draw the line. Those of you with the highest carbon footprints are going to have to improve. That's basically how policy is being written now all over the world at the municipal, state, and national levels. Next, please. So we're here to address CalGreen. And of course, we want to tie it to Buy Clean in every way possible. So it's not a jarring new thing to the industry or to California consumers. Next. The mandatory provision is just provide EPDs, because right now we're still gathering information about all the industries throughout the building industry and writ large. We don't know what our carbon footprints are, and we have to know that so that we can manage what we now have measured. So the mandatory provisions are provide EPDs for all of these materials in Buy Clean and add concrete. Next. A tier 1 provision would be to start to put limits on it. Set some sort of upper ceiling where you just can't go above that. And tier 2, please, would be a more stringent limit. That's the gist. They fit neatly into certain parts of CalGreen, and much more detail is in the literature that we give you. Next. And here's the gist. And I'll let you look at this for a minute. It's what we're proposing. And of course, there'll be lots of discussion if it moves forward. But I want to reiterate that what both Charlie from CalCEMA said earlier and Tom Teitz and I have both talked about many times is that concrete can be improved pretty easily by just not using so much cement. Cement is the high carbon ingredient in concrete, and it's also the high cost ingredient in concrete. And I've been a practicing civil engineer in California for 44 years, and I can tell you every concrete I work on has way more cement in it than it needs. It's just a habit in the industry. Structural engineers, ready-mix producers, everything. We've gotten lazy about it because nobody ever cared. Just as 50 years ago, nobody cared about efficiency of appliances until Art Rosenfeld showed up. Now we have to care. And that's the gist of what we're really all saying here. So we propose adding concrete to CalGreen and Buy Clean. We just have to figure out how to do it. The details are there to be worked out. Next. Cost implications, well, there's so many different materials we could talk about, but if concrete in particular, as I said, the most expensive ingredient is the most high carbon ingredient, it's the cement. And Tom Teitz already briefly mentioned that there's a huge opportunity just to switch to type IL cements, blended cements that use other low carbon ingredients to get the same performance with a lot lower footprint. The industry just needs to find out and start using it. Next. That's it. That's it on embodied carbon. I'm going to hand off to my colleague from Rocky Mountain Institute in a moment here, but we're talking about getting to true zero and not missing anything that's hidden under the carpeting and addressing all the possibilities through CalGreen and let California be a leader in this department of getting to a real true zero built environment. Thank you.
Hi folks, I'm going to speak for a few minutes about whole building life cycle assessment and a proposal for how we could include that in CalGreen. A lot of the speakers previously have mentioned EPDs and sort of segmenting how we can get emissions data for specific materials like concrete or steel, but whole building LCA puts this all together. Next slide. What is whole building LCA? So it just takes the bill of materials from a building project, and then for each of those materials, you're doing you're gathering life cycle information data, which lives in a tool, and there's many software that exists that actually can compile this. And what you get is a total profile for the embodied carbon of your building project. And this would be done during the design phase of a project. Next. Why is whole building LCA useful and important? It provides the full picture. So unlike EPDs, which are looking just at the manufacturing phase, the whole building LCA would look at everything from manufacturing to construction and all the way through to end of life. And it enables the project team to focus on the areas that would get the most impact. So which materials should they seek optimizations in? And it also will allow project teams to take credit for design measures. So designing a more efficient structural system, choosing an alternate material during the design phase. These are things that could be captured through whole building LCA. Next. What's the value of it? So studies have shown that you could achieve up to a 46% reduction from a typical building through whole building LCA and optimization through that analysis. And so that's a really huge chunk of reduction, and we think this is a valuable carbon reduction opportunity. Next slide. There are some existing references for whole building LCA in the industry, so there's great familiarity amongst design and construction professionals. One is the US Green Building Council's LEED rating system, which has a credit that uses whole building LCA. Next. In terms of policy, there's existing reference policies, one in Vancouver, which requires whole building LCA for new building projects that are seeking rezoning, and the City Council there actually is going to include whole building LCA with reduction in an imminent building code update. So there's precedents out there for places that are already doing this. Next. And CalGreen already includes whole building LCA as a voluntary elective measure. So there's already language in the code as it stands today that has increased familiarity in the industry with what this is and what the process to do this analysis is. Next. So our recommendation is to elevate this elective voluntary LCA language with some edits as a mandatory measure for large non-residential projects. And I'll speak for a few minutes about why we're choosing that segment of the market. Next. So our suggested proposal would be to just use the language and targets as is with a few edits as the mandatory requirement for large projects. And for tiers, you would just increase the level of performance that you would be asking for. Next. Why large projects? How did we choose this 50,000 square feet? We believe that this is the right number where 50,000 square feet buildings, commercial buildings account for over 50% of total commercial floor space, but they're only 8% of the building. So by targeting this group, you get the most environmental benefit from affecting the least number of projects. Next. And how much will this cost? Based on data collected in the city of San Francisco, whole building LCA as a design service costs approximately $15,000. And in the context of a large budget project, this is just a drop in the bucket. So it's an effective measure, and not only is the analysis useful to reduce embodied carbon, but it also can enable overall cost savings because you're really doing a material analysis during the design phase. So it's a valuable cost saving measure as well. Next. And finally, just a roadmap about what's short-term versus longer term in CalGreen. For this update, we've presented our recommendation. Longer term, we believe that there is the ability for the state to collect data from this process and set some more absolute and explicit targets, performance targets for whole building LCA benchmarks. Thank you. Next. I'll hand it to Larry Strain to talk about existing buildings.
Thanks, Anish. It's nice to be here. So I'm here to talk about why existing buildings matter in this conversation. We've got a lot of existing buildings. They're not very efficient. From a carbon standpoint, we can't really afford to replace them all, and we can't afford to leave them alone. We also build a lot of new buildings. They're generally more efficient, but it takes a lot of carbon to make a building. As Bruce said, most of the emissions from the buildings we build today will be the embodied emissions from building them. Reusing existing buildings avoids future embodied emissions for new construction. Upgrading the existing buildings reduces current operating emissions. Next. Reusing and upgrading existing buildings presents a huge opportunity to reduce both embodied and operational emissions. Reusing buildings and materials, particularly when it reuses the building structure and envelope, reduces embodied emissions by 50 to 75% compared to a new replacement building. Upgrading and electrifying our existing building stock is an effective way to drive down operational emissions quickly. We know how to do this, and we know it's less expensive than building new buildings. We're still going to need new buildings, but we think it's time to prioritize reuse and upgrade of what we already have. Next. The code sections, or some of the code sections that address reuse, and especially reuse of buildings, are in A4.105 and A5.105. They're currently reserved sections and they're voluntary. So the issues we have with this is that, one, they're not mandatory, they're still voluntary, and they're more focused on building deconstruction and material reuse than on building reuse. They also don't incentivize maintaining, salvaging, or reusing carbon-intensive materials or diverting bio-based materials from landfill. So the proposed changes include changing the titles to emphasize building reuse, requiring projects over 50,000 square feet to document the carbon emissions from reusing a project compared to building a new project. And then in Tier 1 and Tier 2, require documentation for smaller projects and require efficiency upgrades for existing buildings tailored to uses and occupancy types. This would be based on ASHRAE's Advanced Energy Design Guide. Projects that comply would maybe not be required to submit product EPDs because you've already done so much. You might be able to give them a benefit there. Next slide. We've proposed specific changes and additions to these code sections that emphasize building reuse, not just material reuse. And we're defining what qualifies as reuse for Tier 1 and Tier 2, and also requiring minimal efficiency upgrades. And this is just an example, but we've got all of these sections, A4.105 and A5.105, with proposed code changes in the repository materials we're submitting. Next slide. So in future code cycles, emissions data that compare reuse to new construction could be used to inform planning and development policy and help set carbon budgets. We also need to develop energy upgrade strategies tailored to use and ownership types, and we need guidelines for operational emission reductions at key points in a building's life cycle, at property transfer, major remodels, tenant improvements, etc. Next slide. Numerous sources indicate that it's generally less expensive to renovate and upgrade a building than it is to build a new one. That's pretty well documented. Incremental cost increases for energy and electrification upgrades are offset by cost savings from decreased energy use. Next slide. Existing buildings are a huge source of carbon emissions. The operational emissions from them are 28% of global emissions. We need to address existing buildings if we're going to reach our climate action goals, and we think Cal Green has a great opportunity to begin to do this. Thanks.
Great. And hi, I'm Wes Solons. I'll take a stab at this refresh. So as you've heard, there's a lot of great new ideas that we're looking at adding to the code, in this midterm cycle as well as in the future updates. And I think with all of that, there needs to be some space made for these new ideas. The Cal Green Code's been in place for over 10 years, required on many projects, most projects. And perhaps there are some things that could be moved, streamlined, removed, et cetera. So we've created a list of priorities that are some moderate short-term changes in Cal Green, as well as some others that could be refreshed. And some of the ideas are to reduce measures that are duplicative, things that point to other code sections or other public resources code. We could minimize measures that are required by other state laws or statute. Perhaps things that are required in law don't need to be in Cal Green so much anymore and don't need to be inspected and verified at the local level. We could move some measures from the Cal Green into the other code sections, like water conservation fixtures could perhaps be in the plumbing code, or some of the light pollution reduction or other measures could go to electrical code. And also there are some strategies that maybe are best in just the building code overall, like the requirements for overhangs and sloping away from buildings, and don't point sprinklers at buildings and rodent proofing, things like that. Those are really quality construction measures that maybe don't need to be in Cal Green anymore. On the next slide, I believe is a list. Yeah, we started to work on kind of a matrix or a list of of identifying some areas. And we'd love to work with the state agencies in thinking through these. These are just ideas, a place to get the conversation started. But overall, the idea is to lighten the load a bit, because we are recommending some changes, especially to the mandatory code, that are significant and would really prioritize climate change as sort of the impact that we're trying to address through CalGreen. And we need to make some space for that. With that, I'll move it over. I'll give it back to Michael Malinowski to wrap it up.
Mike, you're muted.
How we can take a different tack and look beyond the mid-cycle toward the 2024 triennial update. We have prepared a number of one-page outlines that touch on topics that do require research and development. And it's not too soon to start putting the pins in place to get these rolling now. You've heard a lot of mention on the time value of carbon. We need to prioritize near-term carbon reductions over long-term carbon reductions. Another issue is robust support for REACH codes. We already have over 50 cities and communities in California that have adopted REACH codes, each of them unique, developed with great public cost. And we need more consistency in content, terminology, and metrics, which will actually save money for both public and private sector. We need to focus more on existing buildings. And we also need to look toward the future in how materials and LCA ultimately will become prescriptive and performance options for arriving at carbon budgets. Next slide. So we've covered a lot of material. Why cover so much so quickly in this? Because we took this very seriously. As I mentioned, countless hours by numerous people and over a dozen organizations have been working very hard over the last month to put this package together. The underlying knowledge that we're facing an emergency makes time critical in terms of addressing this crisis. And we have a history in California of being leaders. We gather together, we coordinate, and we proceed with thoughtful actions. And that's what we're suggesting, starting now, not years down the road. And with that, I appreciate your giving us this opportunity. We're thrilled to be here. We're happy to answer questions. All the details will be uploaded to the repository, and we expect there to be robust conversation and consideration of these ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And I do really appreciate the AIA taking some leadership here and bringing together many representatives to provide us that overview of the topic. So you kind of come to a consensus amongst yourselves prior to bringing the topics to us. And I really appreciate that. And I know that you all work together on a regular basis. I think what might make sense is if we, well, we can just go ahead and take questions right now. I was wondering if we wanted to take questions based on the segments of the presentation, but perhaps if you're going to ask a question, maybe you could kind of just recap what part of the presentation you'd like to speak on, so we're all on the same page. I see I've got Ida, your hand is up. James Little, Greg Mahoney, your hand is up. I've got Craig. Can I just go to Ida first, because I want to make sure the state agency representatives speak before we go to public comment real quick. So Ida, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you, Michael, and all the presenters today. But even on this one, I see the extent of the work, and I truly appreciate it. I do have a couple questions. Some is specific to the presentation. And I don't know, Mia, if it, I think maybe what might be good is if we defer to Michael to determine, and his group to determine if they want to break it up and ask questions in a more linear format rather than random questions, because they're going to be the ones answering to it. So it might be better to make it linear. But what I wanted to throw that out there as well is the threshold that you have put out there, in consideration that this is a tri-agency group, I think first we need to take all this information, digest it, and meet before our next meeting and discuss it further as we move forward first. So that would be helpful. I do see this as foundational, that it can be built upon. So that's good as well. I think I'm not going to speak for HCE, but I'm going to speak for schools in understanding that the threshold that you have set really is a non-residential threshold. And I think, is there any way to manage it for schools where we can actually start to increase this, you know, in all the different sectors that we're trying to address? And so I'd like to have a further discussion with you on that. And then I do want to address any of the jurisdictional agencies out there, because we really, you know, we need the enforcement out there and we need the education out there, and we need to know who can provide these resources. And so I'd like that perspective so that we can develop a proposal that is enforceable. And so we need to know what you need to address that as well. And I'm not saying this isn't enforceable. I see that it is, but I want to make sure it's understood so that it is from those who enforce, because I'm an enforcer as well as a regulator. And so I'm looking at it from both those ends. I think those are the comments that I have right now. And I'd like to hear more about it on that end. And oh, one more question. I know that we have a lot of national groups that were involved in this presentation, and I know that this is specific to what we can do in CalGreen and that these requirements are in USGBC and all that. At the national level, is this something that, and please excuse my ignorance on this, is this something that aligns as what's coming also as well on the national level and we're just trying to catch up, or are we setting the stage in advance of what's coming at the national level? And I think that that's a little bit that I want to understand too, because I think it's important that California maintains its responsibility in being a leader. And that's why we brought these groups together, because we know this needs a refresh. And so I was kind of looking at the parallels as to, and so in that regard, more so as well, so that we know, are there lessons to be learned from what's already been implemented, or are we going to be the one setting the stage for those lessons learned in some ways? So lots of questions there, but those are the questions that I have. Thank you.
Wow, Ida, that's really great, and I really do appreciate your putting out those issues. We understand this is a complex topic. We're not expecting a response today. We understand that the state agencies and the industry need to consider these in detail, and then there'll be detailed discussions. So when we talk about particular occupancies and the fine-grained levels of how this would affect the landscape, we are flexible and fungible, because the core, what we're trying to accomplish here is a culture shift. And trying to get the building industry to change its culture and its habits takes time. It involves so many people, so many moving parts, everything from material producers to the laborers in the field. When you think about the journey we all took to bring accessibility from a niche consideration that was rarely even thought about in just a few decades to become part of virtually every project that isn't a single family home. It was not easy though, and there were a lot of steps involved, but we have to start this journey. And so what we're talking about are soft starts. So when you talk about enforcement, if you looked at the details of our proposals in each of these areas, we're not anticipating a heavy hand. What we're anticipating is starting with changing the culture, shifting habits. So we're talking about literally just reporting initially. And the question we've debated amongst ourselves is reporting to who? Well, we would like the reporting to be to a repository that allows for progress. So a publicly managed nonprofit, at least, and perhaps governmental entity that would share the data so that it becomes knowledge that goes back in a cycle and allows for forward progress. That would be ideal. But initially, if it just ends up on the desk of a building official, that's not a bad thing, even if it might not make immediate carbon impacts. Again, what we're recognizing is these changes are big, they will take time, and they involve so many people, so many industries, so many variables, and so many different parts of the marketplace. Schools, what about restaurants? What about this? What about that? You know, it's such a fine-grained matrix, but we have to start somewhere. So we try to be very thoughtful in our recommendations. So it could be put into place and yet not disrupt industry, not all of a sudden blow things up, make things stop forward progress in many different areas. We believe that there's a yin and the yang. So I apologize for the very general answer, but that seemed to be the best way to
So if I understand in some ways correctly, it would be a demonstration in a series of templates, perhaps maybe on a drawing, and then also requiring that that information is reported to a website so that it can be tracked over time. Am I being too simplistic?
That would be the ideal if it went to a website or some, you know, maybe there is a state agency like CARB, for example, that sees this as helping forward their mission. So they might be willing to act as a receiving entity for EPDs and LCAs and other metrics. Because again, if the data is gathered in a way that it becomes useful, that's ideal. But just creating the habit to create the data is also useful. So we're trying to be very realistic in how we start motion. There's a lot of inertia, change is hard, but hearing the concrete industry and Caltrans talk about what they're doing, it's very inspiring because they've already acknowledged that change is necessary. So just getting that realization in place across the industry itself is a huge progress. So just having a platform here to talk about these things and getting consensus that we need to start moving forward more thoughtfully and forcefully, those are huge steps.
So then a question, and I'm sorry if I keep taking the floor, Mia, but I wanted to ask my questions. For a 50,000 square foot building, you had mentioned that it's about $15,000 in cost to address this process of establishing what the whole building life cycle assessment is by documenting, you know, the EPDs and such. That service that's provided, it's provided by the design professionals themselves. If they're skilled, it's provided by a third party. How is that typically, and what is what are the resources out there for that individual? In other words, do we need to do a big focus on educating on how to do this and it's directly to design professionals, or is this a specialized field that you contract with someone and they do it for you? In other words, in the people in getting it there,
Sure.
what is?
Sure, I can speak to that. So I think the industry has gained a lot of knowledge in the last 5 to 10 years on this. It sort of used to be a separate consultant, and now design professionals, architecture firms, or even structural engineering firms are able to have the capacity to do whole building LCAs in-house. That's not to say that there isn't the need for more wider capacity building, but there's a lot of existing resources and educational resources out there already that sort of describe the process and how it can be conducted. And the tools are also available to do this. So we believe that the industry is really ready to take this on, and that fee is, I think, across both consultants and also architects themselves.
Okay, so that's the fee for the service and whoever participates in that service, because it's an additional design cost in some ways. There's time that it takes to do that. And so that's what you've measured, is that time, regardless of essentially who's providing it. It's the fee for service.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. I appreciate that.
I should add, for those who don't know, first to answer your last question, there is a national effort underway. Webley Bowles is on the call from New Buildings Institute, and she and I and many others have been working through ASHRAE on their standard 189.1, which I'm a bit dismayed but not surprised that it's taking a long time, and it's not going to be as strong a standard as I would prefer. And I think California could and should take a leadership position that will probably be a stronger standard. I was also part of the Green Building Advisory Committee that help the GSA determine some procurement guidelines, which they just announced a few months ago for concrete and steel and asphalt. I think I forget what all it covers. Hope that helps. But there's also, I have to add, for those who don't know, there is already a robust repository of EPDs. We know a lot about the carbon footprint of materials because of the EC3, the Embodied Carbon in Construction Calculator. It started out of Seattle. It's a nonprofit. It's gotten funding from a number of sources, and it is already the go-to place that some municipalities and I think states are using as a reference for their policy that they're writing around carbon. If you just Google EC3 or building transparency, you'll find it right away.
Great, thank you. I'm done with my questions, Mia.
Thanks, Ida. Let me see here. Mitchell, you're with HCD. Would you like to chime in here really quickly?
Very quickly, yes. I just wanted to thank Michael and team for putting this together. Fantastic job. I agree with Ida that we will need an opportunity to go back and discuss this between BSC and DSA, and very interested in how we're looking to get to existing buildings. But a lot of this is good information, and I appreciate the work you guys put in. Thanks.
Great. So I see Greg Mahoney, and the names keep shifting around. So I'll just go to Greg Mahoney if you want to chime in. And Greg, maybe you can mention who you're with and who you're representing.
Okay, thank you. Greg Mahoney with Sacramento County representing Calvo. And listening to your presentation and hearing that the intention is to include that in CalGreen, I'm just wondering that by including these provisions in CalGreen, specifically embodied carbon, carbon emissions, and life cycle assessment, that creates an obligation for us and building departments to review and verify this. And so I'm wondering, is that the expectation for building departments to verify compliance with, or perform some sort of review and verify compliance?
Thanks for asking that, Greg. And I have had a chance to chat with you about this. We know each other, just for full disclosure. And I know the concern, and I actually share the concern. And in fact, amongst our working group, there were a number of design professionals who were concerned that CalGreen in its current state is little used and little enforced throughout California. And it's because, in part, it's a specialty area. In our conversations, we referenced, again, how accessibility has gone from being a niche area to becoming something that we all deal with every day on every project routinely. It's no longer a mystery. It's no longer considered a burden that's, there's no room for it. And it may be, going back to one of Ida's questions, that there's a need for similar specialty that the state would curate, because these green requirements are really, it isn't reasonable or responsible to just layer them upon the same individuals who are trying to make sure electrical systems are properly placed, that there's exiting, that fire safe materials accordance with code are being utilized. There's a limit to how much you can ask a field inspector or a building official to take on their normal day-to-day routine. And we recognize that. So what we're talking about is a runway, if you will. Initially, it may end up not getting the scrutiny that it deserves. And initially, it may not have the carbon benefits that we would hope. But ultimately, we believe by having it in a CalGreen in a framework, it could create an opportunity to create something perhaps along the lines of a CASP, a Certified Access Specialist, where there are individuals who are trained and knowledgeable in these various requirements. I mean, right now there are, for example, as we discussed in our sidebar conversation, requirements for commissioning that I know most building departments do not have the capacity to evaluate or even monitor. And so it already is an issue. Putting more into CalGreen makes it an even greater issue. We're well aware of that, and we want to work with CalBol closely to make sure that we don't break the needed protection of public health, safety, and welfare, that we proceed cautiously and judiciously, and that the funding and the mechanisms are in place to make sure that, you know, this all works.
I'm a little bit concerned about the direction that CalGreen has headed, in that there are provisions in there that are really not enforceable. And by adding more of those, we're kind of setting this precedent that, yeah, the code's in there, but you don't have to enforce it, or we can enforce it. And so I feel like in some ways it degrades the integrity of the code if, you know, these provisions are included that are neither easily enforceable or enforceable at all. And so it's almost like now it's an option, you know, if you don't want to enforce it, you don't have to enforce it. And like I said, I'm concerned about what that does to the integrity of the code.
It's a good point.
So if what I'm listening to, Michael, I'm sorry for chiming in here, but are you saying something? You had mentioned CAS. I was thinking more like for the building department purpose, like an acceptance testing technician at that Energy Commission now requires, you know, certified by third parties, third-party acceptance testing technicians that need to come in and ensure that, you know, when the facilities are, before they're turned over to the owner, everything's operational as designed in the drawings. And is that kind of what you're mentioning, that assists building departments and saying they provide a certificate saying third party, here it is? Yes, it does. And I know that we're starting slow and this is probably well in the future, but I'm just saying, is that kind of what you had when you were saying that, envisioning, I guess?
Yes, and you spoke it, you played it much more clearly than I did, Ida. Thank you. We were talking about something more aligned with the special inspection process, where right now a building official can require an outside entity that has expertise to take care of verifying certain things. Most of that's now about structure, but I can envision how you could take that concept and apply it to all these green requirements, because what it does is create a mechanism to allow the marketplace to address the requirement, and it can do it cost effectively and efficiently, just like we do now for a lot of other specialty areas where there are special inspection requirements. And there already is a framework in the code for that. So it would literally be another place where when a project's submitted, the design professional would indicate what special inspections are necessary, and it would become routine, and everybody wouldn't be deer in the headlights. It would just be handled just like a lot of other technical complex aspects of projects are now. It is possible to have your cake and eat it too. You just have to set the pins up.
Michael, if I could jump in just real quick to pick up on what Greg at Calvo was saying. I think one of the things we were presenting in that kind of refresh or housekeeping, as you called it, is exactly what you're saying, Greg. Like, some things are not easily enforced or not written to be enforceable. You know, are there ways that we could look to either move those requirements around, get rid of them, make them more enforceable? I feel like that's a really important step we need to do, you know, now and also going forward, to make room for, again, these types of important considerations that may be difficult, may be complex. You know, later on they can get more detailed. As Mike's saying, was the first thing is to just start getting the practitioners involved, getting the reporting, understanding the tools and resources, and we can increase the complexity. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, you know, getting that refresh, like doing a scan for CalGreen. How can we make it a better document for enforcement verification and make room for these things?
I would absolutely support a cleanup of CalGreen. There are some things that are really not enforceable and probably shouldn't be in CalGreen. And I also just want to say that most building departments have exceeded their bandwidth and adding new requirements every year, and it seems to happen most in CalGreen. It's just we can't do it. You know, we have, something has to drop off the table if we're going to take on something new. We're kind of maxed out, and it's extremely difficult right now even to staff our departments. So we're really kind of struggling right now with filling vacancies and as we do fill vacancies, they're done with people who don't have experience, and we have to train them. So we're pretty much tapped out. We've, like I said, exceeded our bandwidth.
Greg, I hope that you'll take a look at this detailed spreadsheet that Wes has mentioned. It actually has columns for how enforceable is this requirement, how impactful is it, how relevant is it current and up to date? And we're hoping that everyone will look at this detailed spreadsheet and actually add to it, because there's probably other things that have been missed. But I know Wes has really spent a huge amount of time going through and combing through CalGreen. And there are a lot of opportunities for near-term improvements to reduce the burdens that already exist and the inconsistencies and the unenforceable provisions. But we welcome everyone to take a look, because that's cleanup that could happen and start this mid-cycle. There's no reason to kick that down the road.
Okay, thank you. I won't take up any more time. I know there's a lot of people who have questions.
Thank you, Greg. I see that Greg Dick from Cal Recycle, you've had your hand up for a while, and then I'll go to David Solomon.
Yeah, thanks, Mia. Definitely interesting presentation, and thank you all. A lot of these definitely align with the state's stated goals of developing the circular economy and reducing carbon impact and materials, etc. So I would definitely enjoy hearing more and working with you all to explore these.
I think we're
and,
having
I've struggled with Greg's thing too, is how do we do
Hey, Greg, I'm sorry. We're having some challenges hearing you.
that are enforceable. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think your bandwidth is low. We're having some challenges with your audio. We couldn't hear you.
No?
I'm not sure that's any better.
Okay.
Can we come back?
I'll try again later.
Okay,
But
thanks, Greg.
I'm definitely like to explore more.
Okay, I'll go on to David Solomon.
Hopefully my bandwidth works here. David Solomon, supervising architect with Department of General Services, Real Estate Services Division. So we're the architects for a bunch of state buildings. I really like the proposals in general. I particularly like coordinating the CalGreen with the Buy Clean California, because that affects us as state agencies. For building laws that are not currently in Title 24 in any of the building standards codes, I do think that there's some value of leaving references, whether that's in CalGreen or somewhere else, to steer architects and engineers and other building professionals towards the appropriate sections of laws, other laws. As design professionals, we're kind of trained to refer to the codes, to the building codes first. One example, not in sustainability, but example of diaper changing stations. The use of those is not in the building codes, it's in health and safety codes or government codes. So having references to stuff like that in the building codes is absolutely helpful. And referring to the earlier conversations on cool pavement, a lot of building projects include a lot of site work, which could include not just parking lots, but on-site roadways, plazas, stuff like that. So we do want to make sure that we are adequately addressing any kind of flat work when we're looking at sustainability of pavements. So thank you again. Look forward to more.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that. I see Craig Schiller with looks like CHPS. Chips?
Yeah, hi. Thank you. Craig Schiller from the Collaborative for High Performance Schools. I'm the executive director here. My question is maybe comment and question on something that on the topic, Larry, you were talking about in your presentation, which is the sustainability importance of reusing buildings. I think the concept I want to bring attention to is for schools specifically, I think there's a balance here between the sustainability of the building and the embedded carbon of reuse versus new construction. And then the science we have on how passively buildings can influence positively student health and productivity. So I'm just curious here how we think about, when a building can be reused, knowing if it's designed in a certain way, we are losing, 8 to 16% of students' productivity, attendance, et cetera, just by the design alone. When we making that call for, there's a X amount of carbon savings to reusing the building versus an X amount of productivity gains from designing a new building. I think that's something we really struggle with when we're reviewing school projects. And I don't know if you
Yeah, well, I guess the idea of reuse is never meant to supplement other design considerations that have to be made, especially with something like student performance, or in case of housing with occupant health or everything else. So it's just, I think what we're thinking needs to happen is, along with those considerations, looking at whether to replace a building from a carbon standpoint is an important one. It's another important metric to look at every time. So, and I think the other thing I think that's important to think about is not just sort of a, patch up what you got and just keep using it, but radical transformation of existing buildings, keeping the carbon intensive pieces of the building, like the foundation and structure, everything else might go, and you still might have saved 60% of your carbon just by doing that. So there's been some great examples of projects that did major transformations. It looks like a whole new building, but they saved the carbon intensive pieces of that building. So it's not to reuse a bad building. It's either to get rid of it or to make it a much better building, not just from a carbon standpoint, from all those other standpoints as well. So.
All right. Thank you, Larry. That's a great answer. I think we'd be really interested in those best practices for reusing a building from a carbon perspective. I think my concern is the carbon is difficult, but it is possible to quantify, and we can get a number on that. The performance and health benefits are not easy to quantify, and it's hard to get a concrete number on that. Terrible pun. Get a number on that. So I don't want us to have one set of numbers and then some wishy numbers. So we're regularly leaning on just the carbon side. But those best practices would be great.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks, Craig. How about Vanessa?
Thank you. This is Vanessa O'Connor with ASHRAE, the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. I'm actually just a member from a local chapter in San Jose. And I know there's already others working on this, on a much higher level, especially since ASHRAE has a task force for building decarbonization. So I just wanted to make a quick comment. When you were covering retrofitting existing buildings, I appreciated the reference to ASHRAE's Advanced Energy Guide as a guide for retrofitting existing buildings. I think that was one of my main concerns, is if engineers will be pointed to a document or a guide just to keep the transition smooth. So kind of in agreement with what David Solomon said, just making sure there are references to help guide our industries. I'm sure the task force is already involved or following this, again, on a much higher level, but I'll remind them to keep this collaborative on the forefront of their mind. And just wanted to thank AIA for their presentation again.
Thank you. I see Avita. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Sorry.
Hi, this is Avide Higigi. I am an architect, a practicing architect with ZGF Architects. And I just wanted to speak a little bit from my experience with designing some of the state's largest buildings. We have a lot of buildings over 50,000 square feet within the state that we work with. And these buildings are both state-owned and privately owned buildings. So we have all types of clients that we're working with. And we are the designers for the state's largest zero carbon building. It's actually the United States' largest zero carbon building, the Richards Boulevard Office Complex. We were also the architects for the California Air Resources Board facility out in Riverside. It's a 400,000 square foot facility. This building is net zero energy, but more importantly, on this building, we were able to achieve a 10% whole building reduction in terms of life cycle analysis and carbon impact. For the concrete specifically, we were able to achieve almost a 20% reduction in global warming potential. And we were able to achieve this with zero cost add and zero schedule impact. So from my perspective, the strategies that are being presented today, to be especially the ones that are being presented for the mandatory measures in Cal Green, are extremely achievable. They don't require a whole lot of expertise and resources, and they do not add cost to projects, most importantly. Another thing I wanted to mention, Ida, you made a comment earlier about the time and resources involved in, for example, an LCA. So I wanted to speak to that a little bit. We are starting to do more whole building LCA analysis on our projects, and across the board, we're spending about 2 weeks on LCA analysis. And on these large projects, 2 weeks, and the $15,000 fee that was presented earlier is about right on average. So, for these projects that span a time frame of a couple of years, at least 2 weeks is a drop in the bucket. But it does give us really useful information on strategies, where to focus our effort in terms of reducing embodied carbon, which is really important. And for the materials approach, the approach of gathering EPDs, that approach is, a couple of hours on the EC3 tool online to find EPDs and to document them. The EPDs are widely available, easily available, especially for the material categories that are already in BioClean California, and also for concrete. There's really zero barriers to that. And then the third and last point I wanted to make is in terms of building reuse. Somebody else earlier brought up the question of, especially for schools, it's a fine balance of reducing carbon emissions, but also making sure that we have the best spaces for students in the classrooms. So there are examples of that where we have reused buildings. In fact, at Cal State Los Angeles, we just completed a building reuse. It was a building that the university planned to tear down, and we retrofitted that building. And in retrofitting, not only did we save huge amounts of carbon, but we were able to maximize the daylighting, way more daylighting than they had in that building before, just by retrofitting the envelope. And by doing that, we're also able to reduce energy loads. So it is possible if it's thought about early in design. But I think that was a great, valid point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you breaking that down. I see Webley next.
Hello, I just wanted to, I wasn't sure if I could jump in earlier. I wanted to respond to some of Ida's great questions. So she'd asked the question around national lessons learned. And as Bruce mentioned, he and I have been working at the national level. And some of the things that we've noticed, and echo what Vanessa previously said, is that stakeholder collaboration has really been essential to hear all the different concerns while meeting the GHG emissions for the state and these individual projects. But getting that buy-in is really important. And we've been doing that kind of at the national level. And it's just an ongoing conversation. Bruce mentioned ASHRAE 189.1, and I wanted to real briefly mention that in ASHRAE 189.1 Working Group 9, working on the materials, we are looking at an EPD reporting and GWP limit approach for materials. I can't really say much more than that, but just generally to let you know kind of where we think that this is going. Also at the national level, Denver's Green Code accepted EPD reporting and GW limits for steel and concrete. That will be going to council in the fall to be accepted. I don't have the exact dates on that, but just know that that's also happening out there. And I think many people are aware that there's a lot of jurisdictions, primarily at the state level, that are looking at policies like Buy Clean. And again, that's more of that materials level approach. There has been interest in the whole building LCA, and there's also been a lot of apprehension around it. Anish stated that we need more research, and we absolutely need more research. From NBI's perspective, we need more standardization to be able to set those GWP limits for that whole building LCA, and we need standards that look at different building types and address all building systems. But I think that right now, where CalGreen is and the recommendations that we have put forward is a great approach. There were also a couple of notes about compliance I just wanted to mention. A lot of the code discussions I've been having around the country have reflected a lot of the concerns around implementation. How is this done? And it's a non-life safety topic that's being implemented, right? And there are measures in place for addressing non-compliance. We also have measures in place for making sure that these requirements are in the code. We have project specifications, and plans reviewers can review those, make sure that we have GWP limits in there, EPD reporting required in there. Plans reviewers can review that. Site inspectors can ask for EPDs when they're on site. At the end of the project, I don't think any jurisdiction wants 150 EPDs or even 10 EPDs on file. So the architect or another design professional can provide a letter stating that that they have been met. So, and then for non-compliance, as I mentioned, there's ways, there's fines in place. There's ways that we can address non-life safety structures. For instance, windows, like site-built windows, is not a life safety issue if they don't have the NFRC and RFC certification in place. So there's the great thing about code is that there is this process in place. Also the difficult thing about code is that it doesn't address every single product that's being built in, every single product that is being manufactured in the country or a state. So is there another policy that we should be looking at besides code? And I know this conversation is focused on code, and that's why we're here. So I think that there are other policy mechanisms that we can look at, but I think that working with this group with AIA California has been fantastic to put together these 3 proposals for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lovely. I know, Ida, you had your hand up for a second, but you took it back down. I just want to recognize the time. I see someone else with their hand up. 1 second here. I just want to recognize the time. It's 11:46. This meeting is scheduled until noon. We've heard from the AIA and then had a lot of question and answers after the AIA's presentation. And I just want to open it up to the group. Is there someone else in the on the line that would like to speak or present something before we, I just kind of want to get a pulse on the group here real quick.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, Tom. Hi, Tom. Go
Hi.
ahead.
Yeah, I've talked with you folks and CC in the past years about life cycle assessment of overheating risks for future climate and urban heat buildup and so on. And I've submitted some proposals recently for Title 24, which didn't get much traction. But CalGreen seems like a good option, and I can walk through that in a few minutes and at least get the ball rolling. There's some good examples out there now where it looks very cost effective to design for future climate, prevent overheating. And there's also many practitioners now doing multi-objective optimization so they can reduce carbon, overheating, and energy costs and so on. So there's a lot. The best practice is basically to do passive cooling for future climate, and then monitor for a year to verify your model is actually accurate, because oftentimes the internal loads or the equipment functioning is not quite right. So that's the gist of it.
Okay, I had someone else had their hand up and I've lost them. So now I see Nicole's hand is up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Nicole Ty. I'm kind of leading a subcommittee from groups, from folks from the Bay Area Deconstruction Work Group, and really focused on the materials end of reuse and deconstruction. And I just wanted to give you a quick update on what we're doing on our end. We did have a preview of this presentation before, so we were able to kind of collaborate. So we're going to be kind of breaking up into 4 different groups regarding definitions and corrections related to deconstruction and materials reuse, specifically, not whole building reuse. Linkages to SB 1383, mandatory prescriptive measures, and model ordinances and measures. And we'll also submit some, we're working on creating a document with different reports in it so that we can share that with the group. It would be great if you would be interested, if we could do a presentation in August of what the group has kind of developed in terms of its recommendations. I just wanted to check in and make sure that that's something the group would be interested in, in hearing from us.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I can work with you online to make sure you're on the agenda for the August meeting.
Okay, great.
Thank you for that. And you remind me, you spoke at a prior meeting and mentioned that I think you mentioned that you were working with various entities to take a look at the deconstruction regulations, right?
Yes, yeah. So we have some folks from San Francisco Department of the Environment, San Jose, and Alameda. We have a good amount of agencies represented from the Bay Area. If there's anyone on the call that's from Southern California that would like to join, feel free to email me and I will add you to the group. My email, I can put it in the chat if that's a possibility.
That's okay. Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And did you mention before you were working with Greg Dick at Cal Recycle?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he's involved. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, very good. Tom, I'll go back to you real quick. I felt like maybe you wanted to provide some more information and I didn't want to cut you off. I apologize.
Oh, well, I just threw together some slides from some of the proposals I've made. And so I know you're almost out of time, but I guess I could try to do it in 4 minutes and see what you think.
Sure, yeah, I think that's
Let me grab one other slide that.
You want me to go on to another question real quick and then I'll hop back?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I see Timony. I don't have my glasses on.
You got it right. That's it. Yes, I am also working with Nicole and the team from the Bay Area Deconstruction Work Group. And I just wanted to share one thing that we see as a quick win opportunity, and we'd be interested in any advice the group has. In Washington and in Oregon, they've adopted code language that explicitly allows the reuse of undamaged lumber for structural purposes without regrading. And that's a big help in moving the markets. It's just such a, I think, a quick win. So we'd love to keep that discussion moving in California. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Tom, are you ready?
Yeah, let's see. I can do a share screen if you want. Try that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have to give me permission, right?
I think you have permission. I think we've granted that to everyone.
Okay, and so I have to get into Zoom and do that. Sorry about that. This is all, wasn't sure you'd even have time, so I'll do what I can do.
We see it. We see
there you
it.
Go.
Yep.
Yep. Let me see if I can do, what is it, view? Slideshow. There you go. Okay. Well, as you know, we're going to have a lot hotter and maybe humid climate everywhere. Sacramento is going to be like Phoenix by mid-century, but we're not designing our buildings for that. But it's going to be, instead of mixed heating and cooling, it's going to be probably like 90% cooling demand by mid-century, and definitely a lot worse by late century. And this is about life cycle analysis, and it affects embedded carbon as well. And this is the basic process that's been used in Europe a lot, and it's being used now in Canada and elsewhere. And it's to address mainly overheating risk, but it also affects how you design your cooling system and minimize energy and carbon and so on. And this first step is to identify the risk and problems and set some target metrics, and then assess that risk using basically, there you go, using future weather files and some cases extreme weather files, and then factoring population growth. Then look at your passive cooling measures first, then factor in other objectives. And there's actually cool software to do that now, so you can balance all these objectives. And I like the acronym MOVE. So you can include carbon and cost and other things. And then the best practice that's being used a lot, especially say passive house builders, is to monitor the first year, to commission the building and make sure you are getting it right and learn from that. I don't have the slide here, but the bottom line is that several countries and British Columbia have overheating standards in their building standards. And they're based on future climate weather files. And Canada's, as a nation, is developing that now. They've done a lot of research on this, and they provide, in most of these countries, they'll provide the future weather files, and California has developed that method and could do that. The basic step, and answer to your questions on whether it could be done here, is that it is a relatively easy change. You can just use these future weather files and optimize your passive cooling measures. There's some research needed to estimate the net health and carbon and other benefits. And then, of course, the climate zone variation in California. From the UK experience, they just adopted a national standard for future homes to use future weather files and minimize carbon. And they've found that they could actually reduce the cost from materials and equipment using this approach. But it would be good to have a task force or subgroup to have the various health and building and design experts develop a kind of a California specific approach. There's a lot of reference materials from other countries. And in terms of cost implementation by the agencies, it hasn't been an issue from what I've heard. It would still take some design time, probably on the order of, a day to a week to the designers to do this. But, once they've done the learning curve, it should be a lot better. Basically, the approach is to do a whole house design optimized for passive cooling, then model dynamic hourly energy and thermal performance for future climates, then assess the overheating risks as an example of typical temperature targets for the cooling season. Then you tweak your design to keep the overheating hours under 5%. And it's done in a tier because the higher temperatures, of course, have a much higher risk. So the ones you want to really minimize. And then also some developers or planners have phased in these items. So they make the building ready to add on, for example, more shading. They put in the brackets to start with and then add shading later as they go, or add in other facilities for green roofs or whatever. But and then there's also the passive survivability during power outages. And we've adopted these kinds of standards in the chips for schools a few years ago. So there's various examples of that out there, in the US and LEED and so on. And it has been shown to be cost effective by modeling in British Columbia and excuse me, in other areas, I believe. New York City did a big modeling study for multifamily buildings and found some cost-effective approaches. So that's, I think, all I've got for now, basically. The new mantra is energy security, you know, in terms of avoiding power spikes in power costs and reliance on foreign oil and all that. So that's another issue, is the grid resiliency benefits, which can be a big one because you can shave the peak and you don't have to start running gas peaker power plants for cooling in the evening. So that's it. And there's various groups in the US and elsewhere working on this. And we really need to get the ball rolling now rather than waiting 5 or 6 years for Title 24. This was in the extreme heat adaptation plan in 2013. So I think we're overdue to address it. And with that, thank you for your time.
Sure, thank you, appreciate that. Yeah, I hear you. I think some of this is a little bit of an overlap with the energy code as well. So that gets a little tricky too when we're having these conversations about the pieces of Cal Green that we're working with. I see Eric, you have your hand up. Eric.
Yes, I'd just like to ask if Tom would mind emailing that presentation to me so that I can include it in the documents inbox.
Sure. Do I have your email on the agenda or somewhere?
I can give it now if not, and it's Eric, E-R-I-C, .Drever, that's D as in Delta, R-I-E, V as in Victor, E-R, at dgs.ca.gov.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, appreciate it. I'm trying to hop over to a different slide here, but it won't let me do it. Let me just go back over here. I'm going to share my screen for a minute here. And while I share my screen, I can't really see whose hands are raised, but Barbara will fill me in. I wanted to, well, let me just wrap up agenda item 5 homework. So we are going to have time for agenda item 6, but I think what I heard is there's many items that were discussed in agenda item 5 that overlap with the specific divisions that are listed in agenda item 6. And I had a feeling that would occur. So I don't know that it's that pertinent to dive into agenda item 6. It's there for discussion purposes. And we can carry that conversation over into the next meeting as well. I think, I appreciate Eric. Thank you for asking that Tom send you that PowerPoint. What I've put on the screen here is, and I will attempt to post this on our website on today's date for today's meeting. We had a little website problem last night, so I couldn't post a slide, but it contains hyperlinks. If you would like to sign up for our listserv, so you probably already are, if you're attending this meeting, you received a notice. If you did not receive a notice directly and got it from someone else, you may want to sign up on our listserv to receive meeting notices and other things. And I've listed BSC, DSA, and HCD's listservs here. Those are hyperlinked. The other item here is email BSC, DSA, or HCD with your Cal Green Code change recommendations. Just what Ida mentioned earlier is we need to sit down as the 3 agencies and assess the information we've received during the past 3 meetings and determine what may or may not be able to be achieved this code cycle and find out what we need more information on as well. We'll be getting back to you all with more information on what's needed for the cost benefit analysis to support these code changes. That is, I hope to explain that that's a huge hurdle that the state agencies have. I think a lot of us look at the code pages and assume that if we just need to do underline and strike out to make some changes. And unfortunately, a rulemaking package consists of quite a number of Administrative Procedure Act requirements by law, cost benefit analysis information, and then a very robust review process with each state agency's legal department, budget department, their agency secretary, and then the Department of Finance in order for a regulation to be available for the commission to review. So I just want to let everybody know that that's the challenges that the state agencies face. Also wanted to let the folks on the line know that in addition to the efforts being discussed at the Ccrc meetings, the state agencies are also conducting workshops on existing building code changes, bird-friendly electric vehicle charging. We'll be having a plumbing code workshop coming up to talk about gender-neutral restroom options. So this intervening code cycle is turning out to be a pretty heavy lift for the intervening code cycle. And so I just want to make the folks on the line aware of the workload that the state agencies have as well. I think by mid-September is about the time the state agencies need to pretty much have a good determination of what they're moving forward with and developing code language. So if you have suggested, and I know that in some of the presentations we've seen, there is actually suggested strikeout and underline code changes. That is extremely helpful for the state agencies. That information can be sent to the 3 emails that you see listed there. That's Eric's email that he just mentioned. The Title 24 is HCD's common email, and then the CVSC is our common email. It would be helpful if you could provide Ccrc in the subject line so the folks monitoring those email addresses can zero in on those comments. I feel like I'm missing something. I think the other thing we're going to do is we have the next meeting is scheduled for August 4th, which we're finding comes up pretty darn quick. We scheduled these out every 6 weeks. And so we're going to take some time to do some more research. We will have that on the books, but it may be that we need a little bit more time to do some more work in August in order to have that 3rd meeting. But we'll just schedule August 4th as a date right now. And I'm sharing my screen, so I want to open this up to HCD and DSA for any follow-up comments.
None from me, Mia, just that we'll be connecting with folks if we have additional questions as we discuss.
Okay. Sorry, Barbara, did I miss something?
I muted Ida, I thought she was talking.
Well, I heard part of Ida, but I think DSA doesn't have any follow-up questions right now. Is that right?
I don't see any hands up. Emily has her hand up.
Emily Withers?
Yeah, I have my hand up. This is Emily Withers from Department of Housing. I'm not sure if we're going into item 6 or this is the conclusion of the meeting, which I think we're headed into. It's a conclusion, right? So yeah. I just wanted to mention that HCD will be holding a focus group meeting on July 11th. And if you're on our subscription list, you should have a notice on that. So what we're looking forward to for HCD is proposals for what we considered like the low-hanging fruit in the environmental quality portion of CalGreen. So this would be the 4.5 sections and the A 4.5 sections, and that could be a voluntary measure, mandatory measure, some measures that have been adopted by Building Standards Commission in their chapters that may be applicable to residential structures. So that's the kind of information we're looking for. So if you could bring your ideas to the July 11th meeting, that would be greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Emily. Any questions from anybody about HCD's efforts as well? And I forgot to mention this earlier, and this kind of goes back to the charter a little bit, is I want to remind everybody that, you know, the state agencies are gonna have to come to a point where we're gonna have to move forward with what we can address this code cycle. But that does not halt this effort of this group. Our intent is to continue to have these meetings and collect information as we move forward in the next couple of code cycles. Because the whole idea here was to, okay, what can we address this code cycle? What can we address in future code cycles? And so the valuable information that we've received during the past 3 meetings is incredibly helpful to continue this conversation. And so after our August meeting, we'll reassess when we need to meet again and how frequently we might need to meet again. And that effort might slow down a little bit when we start developing our code package for this intervening cycle. And then we intend to regroup that. There might be a lull, if you will. I think that covers everything that we wanted to provide an overview on. And back to your point, Emily, yeah, we ran out of time, so we're not going to discuss item 6, which just highlighted the 3 different divisions in CalGreen, which I think were pretty heavily discussed during the other presentations. So I think we're okay not discussing item 6. We're 10 minutes over. Anybody else have a question or a thought before we adjourn the meeting today? Do you see any hands up? And I just want to open it up. I forgot to ask, is there anyone on the Zoom phone line that would like to speak? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Oh, Dan?
We do?
Yeah.
Dan? Dan Wu?
Hi. Thank you. I put in the chat just that we look forward at Department of Public Health with working with BSC and HCD on ways to incorporate measures to prevent overheating. So I didn't know if folks were able to see that, but wanted to just say that on the phone line as well. So thank you again for this meeting overall.
Thanks, Dan. But Dan with California Department of Public Health, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and adjourn. And thank you all for participating today. And of course, if you have any questions, go ahead and email us at any of these 3 emails listed on the slide here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mia.
Thank you.